Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're just casually playing Super Mario 64 when all of a sudden, bam, you hit something. But what'd you hit? It doesn't look like there's anything there, but for some reason, the game considers you to be hitting something in that spot. So this is what we call an invisible wall, and there are many of them in the game. Now for most people, invisible walls are like this mysterious, elusive thing. You may have seen clips like this.
Oh! What was that? There's an invis wall there?
Or like this.
Use of that, so I got a invisible wall!
Or like this.
What? No! What the? What the?
Or like this.
And invisible. Yep. Yep!
Or like this.
Why is there an invisible wall there?
Yeah, why is there an invisible wall there? Why do all of these strange interactions happen? For decades, invisible walls have tormented players, messing up runs and causing tons of confusion, because nobody really seems to know what invisible walls are or why they're there. So, I made it my mission to answer that and put an end to the confusion. So come with me on this journey as we delve into the deep, dark inner heart of invisible walls. This is Invisible Walls Explained once and for all. But before we get to invisible walls, there are some basic fundamentals of Super Mario 64 that we need to go over first. So, all geometry in the game is made up of surface triangles, which you can see here. Now, there are three different types of surface triangles. First, there are floors. Floors are the triangles that you can stand on, and in visuals we color them blue. Second, there are walls. Walls are the triangles that you can push, punch, kick, and wall jump off of. We color them green. And third, there are ceilings. Ceilings are the triangles that if you jump up into them, they'll cut short your upwards trajectory. And some ceilings even let you hang on them and swing around. We color ceilings red. Now, one important property of a triangle is its normal vector. Think of a triangle's normal vector as an arrow that juts out perpendicularly from the triangle. Interestingly, it's the direction of a triangle's normal vector that determines whether the triangle is a floor, wall, or ceiling. If the normal vector is pointing upwards at all, then the triangle is a floor. See, even these triangles count as floors because their normal vectors point just a tiny bit upwards. On the other hand, if the normal vector is pointing downwards at all, then the triangle is a ceiling. So even these ones are ceilings because their normal vectors point just a tiny bit downwards. And finally, if the normal vector is pointing exactly sideways or extremely close to exactly sideways, then the triangle is a wall. So now you know the three kinds of triangles: floors, walls, and ceilings, whose normal vectors point upwards, sideways, and downwards respectively. Note that here I'm showing the triangles from the side, so they just look like lines from this angle. Now we're going to talk about the triangle hitboxes, aka how these triangles affect Mario and the area around them. So let's start with floors. A floor's hitbox extends 78 units below the floor, and its effect is that it snaps Mario up onto the floor. So we can see that as Mario enters the hitbox, he gets snapped up. But now let's make this visual more precise. You see, Mario's position is the point at the bottom center of his model, which I'll represent with this symbol. So when I talk about Mario entering a hitbox, it's purely about whether the point at the bottom center of his model enters the hitbox, not just any point on his model entering the hitbox. Also, Mario doesn't move around continuously, but in discrete chunks, which I'll represent with yellow arrows. So let's watch it again. Mario moves to the right one arrow at a time, and now he's about to enter the floor hitbox. So on the next step, Mario enters the floor hitbox and then gets snapped up onto the floor. In other words, those two arrows happen on the same step, so we never actually see Mario below the floor. Here's what a floor snap looks like in the game. Mario walks towards the wooden post and then snaps up onto it. If we have multiple floors in a row, then Mario would snap up on each one of them, so his height increases each time he reaches a new step. That's how climbing stairs works in the game. And if the floor is at an angle, then Mario would snap up each time he moves. So in this case, his height increases continuously. And that's how ramps work in the game. Though, note that floors will also snap Mario downwards to some extent, so that walking downhill works too. Now let's talk about walls. A wall's hitbox extends out 50 units on both sides, and it's offset to be a little lower down than the wall triangle itself. Its effect is that it pushes Mario sideways in the direction of the triangle's normal vector, which in this case is to the left. So we can see that as Mario enters this hitbox, he gets displaced sideways, putting him exactly flush with the wall's hitbox and also putting him into the pushing animation. Just like before, the arrow for Mario going into the hitbox and the arrow for Mario being pushed out of the hitbox happen on the same step, so we don't actually see Mario inside of the wall hitbox. And so now, if Mario just keeps walking into the wall hitbox, then he ends up pushing against the wall in a state of equilibrium. Like on every step, he goes a little into the wall, then gets pushed out that distance, then goes a little into the wall, then gets pushed out that distance, etc. So that's what's going on when you push against the wall in the game. So even though Mario's position is 50 units away from the wall triangle, it still looks like he's touching the wall because his model is about 50 units in radius. In contrast, if Mario enters the wall hitbox from the other side, then he gets a big push from the wall, because this time he gets displaced almost all of the 100 unit diameter of the wall hitbox. Here's what that looks like in the game, though you're not normally meant to go into a wall from that side. And then for ceilings, their hitbox extends from 160 units below the ceiling to infinitely upwards. Now the lower portion and upper portion have the same effect, but what effect that is actually varies based on what action Mario's in, so let's go through the different actions. First, if Mario's on the ground, then the ceiling hitbox cancels his movement. So you can see that as Mario tries to enter the hitbox, his movement gets cancelled, which prevents him from entering the ceiling hitbox. And he also does the pushing animation when this happens. Here's what that looks like in the game. So note that even though Mario's 160 units below the ceiling triangle, it basically looks like his head is touching the ceiling because his model is just under 160 units tall. Second, if Mario's in the air and tries to enter a ceiling hitbox, then what happens depends on whether he's moving upwards or downwards. If he enters the ceiling hitbox while moving upwards, then his movement gets cancelled and his vertical speed gets set to 0. This cuts short his upwards trajectory, since from that point on, he'll start moving downwards due to gravity. I mean, gravity gets applied every frame you're in the air, but in these visuals, I'm simplifying things and only applying it when it's relevant to the point I'm making. So here's jumping up into a ceiling in the game. It cuts short Mario's upwards movement and then he falls down afterwards. On the other hand, if he enters a ceiling hitbox while moving downwards, then only the horizontal component of his movement gets cancelled, and so he just does the vertical component, which is moving straight down. Like, ceilings aren't going to cancel the whole movement, because that would let you hover in the air, and I have a hunch the programmers didn't want that. So here's what falling into a ceiling looks like in the game. It cancels Mario's horizontal movement to prevent him from going inside the ceiling hitbox, but he still falls down. And then third, if Mario's in water, then the ceiling hitbox doesn't cancel his movement, but instead snaps him down to the bottom of the ceiling hitbox. So we can see that as Mario enters the hitbox, he gets snapped down. Here's what that looks like in the game. Mario snaps down as soon as he enters the ceiling hitbox. And if the ceiling is at an angle, then Mario snaps down each time he moves forwards. So for example, if I swim into the ship, I get moved downwards accordingly. Now, you may find it strange that ceiling hitboxes extend infinitely upwards. Like, if a ceiling triangle's right here, then why should it have an effect way up here? Well, the thing is, most of the time, you only have access to the lower portion of the hitbox. The upper portion is usually out of reach, and so you wouldn't notice its effects. In fact, ceilings typically fall into one of two cases. Case 1, we're in an enclosed room, so the hitboxes look like this. In this case, the hitboxes prevent you from exiting the room. Like, if you try to exit downwards, the floor snaps you back up. If you try to exit sideways, the wall pushes you back in. And if you try to exit upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the room keeps you inside, and so you'd never normally be all the way up here interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. And then case 2, there's an enclosed structure, like a box. So the hitboxes look like this. Now, I said ceiling hitboxes extend infinitely upwards, but that's just what they do in isolation. Because you see, when there's a floor above the ceiling, then the ceiling hitbox only extends upwards until it meets the floor hitbox. So you can see that the inside of this box is filled with the upper portion of the ceiling hitbox. And once again, this upper portion is inaccessible since there's no way to enter the box. Like, if you try to enter going downwards, the floor snaps you back up. If you try to enter going sideways, the wall pushes you back out. And if you try to enter going upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the box keeps you out, and so you'd never normally be inside of it interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. One other note, you can see that the triangle hitboxes overlap in some cases, which brings into question which ones take priority. Well, that's actually pretty simple. Wall interactions happen first, so I put their hitboxes on the top layer, then floor interactions, so they're on the next layer, and then ceiling interactions, so they're on the bottom layer. Now, even though ceiling hitboxes cancel Mario's movement, there are still some ways to enter a ceiling hitbox, like by having an object push you into it. For example, here I have a Bob-omb push me into a ceiling hitbox, specifically the ceiling on the underside of the cog. So now I'm actually stuck because the ceiling cancels any movement I try to do, and it won't let me jump up either. Separately, here's what it looks like to enter a ceiling hitbox in the air. Mario just falls straight down since any sideways movement gets cancelled. And so there, we actually did touch the upper portion of a ceiling hitbox because we entered above the ceiling of the tunnel. So anyway, now we know the hitboxes of the 3 types of triangles. But there's one other hitbox that's also important, which is out of bounds. Now the term out of bounds can mean different things depending on the context. Like, a person might say that getting right here is out of bounds, because this isn't somewhere that you're intended to go in the course. But that's not what we mean in this case. See, the most useful way to define out of bounds is any point in space where there's no floor triangle below. So if our entire course was just this one floor triangle, then all of this area would be out of bounds. So that's everything to the side of the triangle and below it, just not above it. Think about it like this. The default state of space is out of bounds, and floors create safe havens above them. Also note that we color out of bounds gray and give it this symbol, and you'll see why in a moment. Now for the most part, Mario isn't allowed to enter out of bounds. If he's on the ground and tries to enter out of bounds, then his movement gets cancelled and he pushes, just like with ceilings. An easy place to see this is on the castle roof. Just walk up to the edge and Mario will start pushing. If Mario's in the air and tries to enter out of bounds, then the horizontal component of his movement gets cancelled, and so he only does the vertical component. So unlike ceilings, this happens for both upwards and downwards movement. That means you can jump up against out of bounds without it cutting short your upwards trajectory. And finally, if Mario's in water and tries to enter out of bounds, then his movement just gets cancelled. There's not a normal place where this happens in the game, but if you clip into the tunnel in Wet Dry World like we did earlier, then you'll fall into the tunnel after the loading zone. Because of that, the town section of the level isn't loaded, and so you can just swim into the end of the tunnel. This is swimming into out of bounds, so Mario's movement gets cancelled and he just ends up swimming in place. So the reason Mario's not able to jump off of courses like Bob-omb Battlefield is because you can't move into out of bounds. There's no actual wall triangles on the edges of these courses keeping you in. And for courses with death barriers like Cool Mountain, the reason you can jump off of these courses is because the death barrier itself is made up of floor triangles. Here's a zoomed out view of the whole course. So you can see that the death barrier is made up of 2 giant floor triangles below the main part of the course. And then here's a side view of the 2 courses. So Cool Mountain has a death barrier floor below it, while Bob-omb Battlefield doesn't. The death barrier creates a safe haven all around the course, making that area habitable. So that's why in Cool Mountain, you can jump off the course and go below it, whereas you can't do that in Bob-omb Battlefield. Now it is technically possible to enter out of bounds, but it's even harder to do than entering a ceiling hitbox. Like, our old trick with getting pushed by an object doesn't work in this case, because the game knows not to apply the object push if it would put Mario out of bounds. But nevertheless, there are still some ways to do it. For example, we can enter out of bounds by doing a ledge grab in this corner and then climbing up. We can jump into a cork box next to a steep hill. We can have the ground move out from under Mario, which is done here using the merry-go-round floor. And we can have Chuckya throw Mario out of bounds. As you can see in each of these cases, Mario dies when he goes out of bounds, which is why we give out of bounds the skull and crossbones symbol. But also when this happens, Mario stops having his hat on, though you get it back after you respawn. Now everyone always wonders, why does going out of bounds make Mario lose his hat? Well, let me explain. You see, Mario's logic every frame goes like this. First, it resets his hat state, so he'll be in the state of having no hat. Then it lets Mario do his action, like say, 1 frame of walking forwards, and finally, it updates his hat state to be how it's supposed to be, which gives him his hat again. And so his hat will be on by the time he gets rendered. So that's what normally happens every frame. But between steps 1 and 2, there's a check. Specifically, it checks if Mario's out of bounds, and if so, then we're done with the function, don't do the rest of the steps. So let's say Mario's currently out of bounds, and now let's walk through the steps to see what happens. First, it resets his hat state, which makes him have no hat. Then the check ends the whole function since Mario's out of bounds. So we never even get to step 3 where it puts his hat back on, and so we just see Mario without his hat. In other words, we're seeing the intermediate state of things that we're not normally supposed to see. So anyway, now we know the 4 types of hitboxes: floors, walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. Now you may have noticed that there's a bit of a similarity between walls, ceilings, and out of bounds, because they all basically block Mario's horizontal movement. So let's do a side-by-side comparison. On the left, we'll have Mario interact with a wall hitbox. In the center, we'll have Mario interact with a ceiling hitbox. And on the right, we'll have Mario interact with out of bounds. And just to clarify the ceiling case, there weren't many ceilings that worked well for this visual, but I did find one. See, in the castle foyer, I clipped behind this pillar, did a backwards long jump, and then used the speed to clip behind the upstairs key door. Now opening that door loads a new area, so by clipping behind it, we end up in this sort of fake area that you're not meant to be in. There's not many surface triangles here, despite what the visuals look like. So that means we can go to the edge of the floor and push directly on a ceiling hitbox, specifically the ceiling of the hallway below that has the boo in it. So I just wanted to clarify that. So now let's compare the 3 cases. If Mario just walks forwards, then in all 3 cases he stays in place doing the pushing animation. Here's a diagram from above. See, the wall hitbox lets him go into it and then pushes him back out, which makes him be flush with the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes just cancel the movement, so he won't even be flush with those hitboxes. But now watch what happens if we try pushing at an angle instead of head on. In the wall case, we do a sidestepping animation, but in the ceiling and out of bounds cases, we still push, but now at an angle. See, the wall hitbox lets you enter the hitbox at an angle, then pushes you out perpendicularly, which lets you move along the edge of the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes still just cancel the movement, so you don't end up moving along their edges. So to recap so far, the pushing animation isn't actually specific to walls. It can happen for ceilings and out of bounds too, though the sidestepping animation is specific to walls. Now let's see what happens when we jump into these 3 hitboxes. For the wall and out of bounds, the jump goes all the way up. But in the ceiling case, the jump goes nowhere, because like I mentioned earlier, ceiling hitboxes cut short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, Mario doesn't even leave the ground, he just lands instantly. So in our bullet points, let's add that ceilings are the only one that cancel your upward speed. And just to keep the bullet points lined up, let's add that out of bounds is the only one that kills you. But now let's see what happens if we jump into them, but don't touch them until the downwards portion of the trajectory. In all 3 cases, Mario's forwards movement gets blocked and so he just falls down in place. So just like with the ground movement, the wall lets Mario move into its hitbox and then pushes him back out, while the ceiling and out of bounds cancel the movement altogether. But that's just for jumping at a slow speed. If instead Mario jumps into the hitboxes moving at a medium speed, then in all 3 cases he does a soft bonk. You know, a bonk without any star particles and Mario stays upright. So let's add that to our notes. And if he jumps into the hitboxes moving at a fast speed, or during certain other actions like a dive or slide kick, then in all 3 cases he does a hard bonk, which has star particles and Mario falls off his feet. So let's also add that. But now listen to the sound of each bonk. See, when you bonk on a ceiling or out of bounds, it makes a sort of boingy sound effect, while the wall doesn't do that. And so let's add that to our notes too. So overall, you can see that the 3 cases are pretty similar. They all let you push on them, and they all let you bonk on them. So it's easy to see why people might confuse walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. Someone might see Mario pushing and think he's pushing on a wall, but actually he's pushing on out of bounds. And someone might see Mario bonk and think he bonked on a wall, but actually he bonked on a ceiling. So just keep in mind how similar these 3 types of hitboxes are. Now, we're almost ready to get to invisible walls, but there's still one more topic we need to cover first, which is positional units. For example, here I'm showing Mario's position on screen so you can see his x coordinate, y coordinate, and z coordinate. Each coordinate represents how far along Mario is on the corresponding axis. The x-axis goes east and west, with east being the positive direction. The y-axis goes up and down, with up being the positive direction. And the z-axis goes north and south, with south being the positive direction. So take a top-down map of a course. If we zoom in, we can see the grid of individual units. So a single unit in SM64 is incredibly tiny, only like a centimeter wide. And the extra bold lines are the x and z axes. Now we're going to analyze what a surface triangle looks like at this scale. I mean, surface triangles are usually way bigger than this, but we're going to be looking at some pretty tiny triangles for now, just so that we can see how certain properties work. Now, as you know, a surface triangle has 3 vertices, but what you may not know is that these 3 vertices have to have integer coordinates. In other words, the vertices always lie on the intersection of a horizontal unit line and a vertical unit line. So a triangle might look like this, or like this, or like this, but it would never look like this because here the vertices aren't at integer coordinates. The reason for this restriction is because triangle vertices are stored as shorts, and a short is a variable type that can only have integer values between negative 32,768 and 32,767. So it's impossible for a vertex to have a value that isn't an integer. So now let's consider this floor triangle. The question we're going to be analyzing is, where can Mario stand on this triangle? You might assume that it would just be this area, like the area enclosed within the triangle, but that's not right. Let me explain by filling out this little table. So Mario himself is at some coordinates, and those coordinates are stored as floats. Floats are another variable type, and they basically store real numbers, like numbers that can have decimal components. For example, let's say Mario's at x coordinate 1.34 and z coordinate negative 2.79. But that's not the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. Instead, the game first converts those values to another type. Specifically, it converts the coordinates to shorts, and then that's the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. And like I mentioned earlier, shorts can only have integer values, meaning no decimal components. So to convert Mario's coordinates from floats to shorts, the game takes the coordinates and then chops off the decimal components. So it's not rounding, it's truncating. And so to summarize, even though Mario's at 1.34, negative 2.79, the floor detection function first truncates those values to 1, negative 2, and then checks if that new position is within the floor triangle or not. Why does it do that? I guess the programmers thought the calculations would work out better with shorts instead of floats, since floats can have slight rounding errors. But anyway, let me show this on the grid using the same numbers. So Mario's here at x coordinate 1.34 and z coordinate negative 2.79. I'll also add a highlight to Mario's current unit square to make that easier to track. And then for the floor detection point, we can start at Mario's position, but then we have to truncate the decimal components. So for the x-coordinate, 1.34 becomes 1, meaning we go to the left edge of Mario's unit square. And for the z-coordinate, negative 2.79 becomes negative 2, meaning we go to the bottom edge of the unit square. So in general, the floor detection point will always be on the corner of Mario's unit square closest to the origin. And that directly follows from the fact that when you remove a number's decimal component, the number will only get closer to 0. So now if we move Mario around in a continuous way, we can see that the floor detection point moves around in a discrete way. And in all 4 quadrants, the floor detection point is still always on the corner of Mario's unit square closest to the origin. On the other hand, if Mario moves around within a unit square, then the floor detection point doesn't even move. In other words, all the positions within a unit square use the same floor detection point, because all their positions truncate to that same corner closest to the origin. Consequently, we can actually think of the corner closest to the origin as the representative for the whole unit square. So whatever floor status the representative point has will be the floor status for all the points within the unit square. So if the representative point is a floor, then the whole unit square is considered floor. If the representative point is out of bounds, then the whole unit square is considered out of bounds. And spoiler from the future, if the representative point is a ceiling, then the whole unit square is considered ceiling. I'll demonstrate this principle with the floor triangle from earlier. We were trying to figure out where Mario can stand on this triangle, and I said it was not just the area inside the triangle. So let's look at some points near the triangle's edge. If Mario's within this unit square, then this is the floor detection point, aka the representative point for the whole unit square. The representative point is not within the floor triangle, so I'll make it gray to indicate no floor. I'll also put a little arrow from the representative point to the unit square, just so that there's no confusion about which unit square it's the representative of. And note that because the representative point is always on the corner of the unit square closest to the origin, the arrow pointing from the representative point to the unit square will always be facing away from the origin. But anyway, since the representative point is gray to indicate no floor, we can color the whole unit square gray to indicate no floor. So even if Mario were here, which looks like it's inside the floor triangle, it would still count as being outside the triangle since this whole unit square is considered outside the triangle. On the other hand, if Mario's within this unit square, then this is the representative point. This time, the representative point is within the floor triangle, so I'll make it blue to indicate floor. And then I'll put the arrow again, and now, since the representative point is blue to indicate floor, we can color the whole unit square blue to indicate floor. So even if Mario were here, which looks like it's outside the floor triangle, it would still count as being inside the triangle since this whole unit square is considered inside the triangle. So going back to the whole triangle, the simplest way to determine where Mario can stand on it is the following process. First, mark all integer points that are within the triangle, including on the triangle bounds. Then put the arrows facing away from the origin to indicate which unit squares are being represented. And finally, fill in those unit squares. And so now, we can see the exact area where Mario can stand on this triangle. So the floor detection area isn't a perfect triangle, but more like a pixelated approximation of a triangle. And because it's pixelated, we get some interesting properties. For example, if the edge of a floor triangle is cardinally aligned, like it's exactly horizontal or exactly vertical, then the edge of the floor detection area will be a straight line. More specifically, if it's an edge that faces towards the origin, then the floor detection edge will coincide with the triangle edge. And if it's an edge that faces away from the origin, then the floor detection edge will be 1 unit offset from the triangle edge. On the other hand, if the triangle's edge is not cardinally aligned, like it's on a diagonal, then the floor detection edge will be jagged. Separately, note that ceiling detection works in exactly the same way as floor detection, since it also converts Mario's coordinates from floats to shorts. So all the insight we just gained about floors also applies to ceilings, like with the representative points and how the ceiling detection area is really just a pixelated approximation of the ceiling triangle. And before we move on, I have one more note about the representative points. So in general, an integer point is the representative for just 1 unit square, which is the unit square away from the origin. But for integer points on the x-axis and z-axis, they're each the representative for 2 unit squares. And the origin itself is the representative for 4 unit squares. So I just wanted to clarify that. And so now, we're finally ready to start talking about invisible walls and what they are. But how can we answer what they are without knowing what they are? In other words, what do we even mean when we say invisible walls? How should we define them? Because we can't find examples of them to analyze unless we know what actually qualifies as an invisible wall. So let's break it down. The term invisible wall has 2 parts to it, invisible and wall. To satisfy being invisible, we just have to not be able to see it. For example, this would count as an invisible wall because I don't see anything there. However, this would not count as an invisible wall because I can clearly see the wall there. And then to satisfy being a wall, you'd think I'd say it has to be a wall. But think about it, a casual player can't see specific triangles and their classifications. Instead, a casual player would just go by what it seems like is happening. After all, they say if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if we apply that principle here, we'd say if you can push on it like a wall and bonk on it like a wall, it's a wall. At least it would seem that way to a casual player. So based on all that, our definition of invisible walls will be any space that's pushable and bonkable but has no visible texture. Now remember our discussion from earlier? We established that walls, ceilings, and out of bounds are all pushable and all bonkable. So really, an instance of any one of these 3 hitboxes could be labeled as an invisible wall, so long as there's no texture associated with it. Now, surface triangles usually have textures, so a wall could only count as an invisible wall if the programmers didn't put a texture for it. A ceiling could count as an invisible wall if you hit its upper hitbox, since that's so far away from the ceiling texture that it would just seem like a separate thing that's invisible. And then out of bounds would always count as an invisible wall, since it's a hitbox with no surface triangles, and so it has no textures. So those are the 3 things that can count as invisible walls. But from there, I've further broken it down into 8 causes of invisible walls. 3 of them are pretty straightforward, 4 of them are a little more involved, and the last one, well, let's just say it's the final boss of the causes. But instead of thinking about them like this, 8 items in a row, we're instead gonna think about them like this, with 4 items on the left, all separate, and 4 items on the right in a 2x2 table, like a Punnett square. So I basically created the periodic table of elements but for invisible walls. And we're gonna spend the rest of the video filling it out. Like, for each cause, I'll explain how it works and we'll look at examples. So, let's dive into the first cause of invisible walls, which has to do with wall triangles. See, most wall triangles have a texture, but surface triangles and graphics triangles are 2 completely separate things in the game. Surface triangles have hitboxes that affect Mario, like we've talked about, and graphics triangles are purely visual. Now for the most part, the programmers made it so that every surface triangle has a corresponding graphics triangle. But there are some exceptions, and so if there's a wall triangle with no corresponding texture, then that would count as an invisible wall. So let's look at some examples. In the hallway leading up to Bowser in the Dark World, there's an invisible wall right after the trap door. Obviously it was put there because this whole hallway is a trap and you're not actually meant to get to the end of it. Then in Tiny Huge Island, there's an invisible wall in the water all along the edge of the course. So this is a rare case when there actually is a wall at the edge of the course instead of just out of bounds. Now if you remember, when you swim into out of bounds, Mario's movement gets cancelled and so you're just kind of stuck there until you turn all the way around. The programmers obviously didn't like that behavior, so they added a wall here so that you can swim along the edge instead of getting stuck. Because remember, walls let you move along them, but out of bounds cancels your movement. And note that this wall is also present in the tiny version of the island. Then in the Slide in Tall Tall Mountain, there's an invisible wall in the shape of a little rectangle at the top of the end of the first tunnel. So you might be wondering why that's there. Well, based on footage of the game's beta, we can actually conclude that this is a remnant of a left turn sign that used to be in that spot. It's kinda blurry, but it's there alright. So that means at some point, the programmers removed the graphics for the left turn sign, but accidentally left in the collision. Also in the Tall Tall Mountain slide, if you head the wrong way and go down the dead end path, you can see that they put a big invisible wall here. This is so that you can't fall off from here and land on a later part of the slide. Instead, they wanted you to plummet to your death. But since now we can see the exact edges of this big wall, we can actually just navigate around it and land on a later part of the slide anyway. In fact, here I've landed on a part after the loading zone, so the rest of the slide isn't even loaded. And so if I continue ahead, I just fall off and die. Then in Big Boo's Haunt, there's an invisible wall above the center of the merry-go-round. It's like a little column sticking right out of the pyramid. See, the camera in this room is normally situated right in the center above the pyramid, and they wanted to prevent you from going through that spot since that could cause the camera to turn really suddenly. But if we use hacks to remove that invisible wall column, we can see exactly what they were trying to prevent. See, the camera does a 180 in 2 frames, which probably isn't the best user experience. Then in Bowser in the Fire Sea, there are some invisible walls right after the funnel at the end. These were put there so that you don't accidentally jump over the funnel and fall down, because then you'd basically have to redo the whole level. But also, there are some invisible walls under the funnel to make sure you can't touch the ending trigger from the side. And finally, in Whomp's Fortress, there's actually a big invisible wall right under the course. So why'd they put this one here? Well, it actually has to do with the water that's in the level. Let me give you a quick rundown on water. So here's the side view of a surface of water. Note that I'm making it purple because blue is already taken by floors. So there are 2 important things to understand about water. First, the hitbox of water extends from the water's surface to infinitely downwards. Like, they never programmed water hitboxes to have a bottom. And second, whenever Mario enters a water hitbox, his height gets set to just under the water's surface and he goes into the swimming action. Now normally, you wouldn't notice the height change because you're only meant to enter water hitboxes from the top, which means you'll already be near the water's surface when your height gets set to near the water's surface. So in most cases, this height change doesn't have a very noticeable effect. But there are some ways to enter water from the side, in which case you can get a huge upwarp to the water's surface. For example, in Tall Tall Mountain, you can clip through this wall into the water behind it. And from there, if you go forwards, you can enter the hitbox of the water higher up in the level, causing you to upwarp to that water. And similarly, in Tiny Huge Island, we can clip into the mountain and then we upwarp to the top of the water that's in the mountain. So going back to Whomp's Fortress, the reason for this invisible wall is to prevent you from entering the water hitbox from the side. But they made a little oversight because to the right of this invisible wall, there's a gap. So you actually can enter the water hitbox after all and get the upwarp, which makes for a nice party trick. In fact, you can say to your friend, I bet you $10 I can jump off the edge and survive. Easy way to make money. So yeah, that's the first cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call wall with no texture. Now let's look at the second cause, which has to do with ceilings. Remember, I said ceilings usually come in one of two forms, the top of an enclosed room or the bottom of an enclosed structure. I also said that the upper part of a ceiling hitbox is so far away from the ceiling texture that it just seems like its own separate hitbox that's invisible. So in these two cases, that would be above the enclosed room and inside the enclosed structure. These two areas are meant to be out of reach, but there are ways to interact with them, which we'd count as interacting with an invisible wall. So let's look at some examples, starting with getting above rooms. Like we saw earlier, in Wet Dry World, you can use Chuckya to clip into the space above the tunnel, which is an upper ceiling hitbox. If we bonk in there, our angle actually gets reflected every frame, because when Mario's in the bonk action, he's programmed to reflect off of ceilings and out of bounds. Since here, Mario's surrounded by ceiling hitbox, he just gets continuously reflected, which looks pretty silly. In Hazy Maze Cave, it's actually possible to glitch this moving platform out of bounds. And so then, we can have the platform move out from under Mario while he's in the air, and so he ends up in the ceiling hitbox above a room down below. In the castle foyer, like we saw earlier, you can clip inside this pillar, and so then you're able to push on the ceiling hitbox of the area below. You know, the area with the stairs that go down to the basement. And also like we saw, you can backwards long jump and end up behind the upstairs key door, and that lets you push on the ceiling hitbox above the Boo hallway. Now let's look at getting inside enclosed structures. In Jolly Roger Bay, it's possible to clip inside the floating ship, whose whole inside is ceiling hitbox. And in Rainbow Ride, we can use a Bob-omb to clip inside one of these glass blocks. And of course, their whole inside is ceiling hitbox too. So those are some examples of getting above a room and inside an enclosed structure. But there's a third case that can happen, and that's if we have something that should be an enclosed structure, but doesn't have a floor on top. In that case, the ceiling hitbox would just continue to propagate upwards unimpeded. In theory, this should never happen in the game, but does it? Well, in the Tall Tall Mountain slide, we have these three arches. And let me make the background white so that it's easier to see. So let's look at the first arch. On its underside, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top side, we have some floor triangles. So no problems here. But now let's look at the second arch. On the bottom, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top, there are no floor triangles. The programmers just didn't put any. So that means the ceiling hitbox isn't covered by any floors, and so it just propagates upwards without anything to contain it. And what about the third arch? On the bottom, we have some ceiling triangles, and on the top, there are once again no floor triangles. So on this arch too, the ceiling hitbox just leaks out into the space above. And so basically, if you've ever tried to jump over the second or third arch, you'll have found that you're unable to, because Mario just bonks on the ceiling hitboxes. We call these exposed ceiling hitboxes, because unlike normal ones that are contained, these ones are just right out in the open, they're exposed. And then there's actually a fourth case for ceilings, which is a ceiling that's all by itself. Not the top of a room, not the bottom of an enclosed structure, but just a ceiling in isolation, whose hitbox would also propagate upwards unimpeded. Surely the programmers never did that, right? Well, in Cool Cool Mountain, we have this bridge near the red coin star. At the end of the bridge are these two flaps on the sides. These were clearly meant to be walls, but they're actually ceilings since they're angled slightly downwards. And because the programmers didn't expect these surfaces to be ceilings, they didn't put any floors to cover them. So the ceiling hitboxes just rise upwards without anything to stop them, meaning that this is another case of exposed ceiling hitboxes. So watch out if you're ever playing around near these two flaps. So yeah, that's the second cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call above ceiling below any floor. Because if there's no floor above the ceiling, then the whole area above the ceiling is bonkable. And if there is a floor above the ceiling, then only the area between them is bonkable. So now let's look at the third cause, which has to do with out of bounds. If you remember from earlier, all courses are surrounded by out of bounds, even if they have a death barrier. And that out of bounds is an invisible hitbox that you can bonk on, so it counts as an invisible wall. So if the course doesn't have a depth barrier, then the out of bounds area will just be on the edge of the ground. And if the course does have a depth barrier, then the out of bounds area will be at the edge of the depth barrier, which you can reach if you jump far enough. So that's the third cause of invisible walls, which we're going to call out of bounds on course edge. And so those are the first three causes, which I said were pretty straightforward. And that's because they directly correspond to the three hitboxes we talked about earlier: walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. So think of these three causes as the simple, basic implementations of those three hitboxes. The remaining causes are more advanced implementations. So let's get to those ones now by next looking at the Punnett square. Specifically, let's look at the fourth cause. Like I said, these causes are more complex. So instead of me saying the cause outright, we're going to build up to it with examples so that you get some intuition. So imagine a structure like this. It's a staircase with 2 steps. Now let's look at this structure from above. Not just like this, but also on a unit grid, which looks like this. So there's a floor rectangle on the bottom representing the lower step, and a floor rectangle on the top representing the upper step. Now I have 2 clarifications to make. First, a floor rectangle is just 2 floor triangles together that form a rectangle. Like, we could analyze this situation on the triangle level, but it's simpler to just pair up the triangles into rectangles and analyze the situation on the rectangle level. So that's what we're gonna do. And second, even though we're looking at the same shape on the left and the right, they're at different scales. The 3D shape on the left is at a normal scale that you'd find in the game, like hundreds of units wide, while the shape on the right is scaled down to be really tiny, like less than 10 units wide. I made it really tiny so that it's easier to see individual units. So for example, if we rotate the 2 shapes, the one on the left will stay normal looking, but the one on the right will deform, because remember, all the vertices still have to have integer coordinates, which has a big effect at this scale. Now on the right side, the structure looks like 2 floor rectangles with a seam in between. On the left side, the structure also looks like 2 floor rectangles with a seam in between, though if we look at the structure from the side, we can see that there's a whole wall on that seam, which causes the floors on both sides of the seam to be at different heights. So on one side of the seam, we have the floor edge at the bottom of the wall, which is the north edge of the lower step, and on the other side of the seam, we have the floor edge at the top of the wall, which is the south edge of the upper step. The question we're going to be analyzing is, are there any gaps between these 2 edges on the unit grid? And in this case, the answer is no, there are no gaps. The lower step's edge and the upper step's edge are exactly flush because they have the same lateral coordinates, so there are no gaps between them. Now if the floors were separated like this, then there'd be a gap, but for now, there is no gap. So let's clear that, put the structure back to a top-down view, and now we're going to rotate it to see if that causes any gaps between the edges. Now even though the 2 edges are changing coordinates, they remain exactly in sync. So for example, at this angle, there are still no gaps between the 2 edges, since they still have the exact same lateral coordinates. So let's rotate the structure back to its starting angle, and now we're going to change the structure itself. You see that upper step? I've now split it into 2 steps, and you can see this change reflected on the unit grid. So again, let's think about the edges that make up the seam between the lower step and the upper steps. Or in other words, the edges at the bottom of the wall versus the edges at the top of the wall. This time, that would be the north edge of the lower step, the south edge of the upper left step, and the south edge of the upper right step. Same question, are there any gaps between them on the unit grid? The answer is no, but the reasoning is a little different this time, because now there aren't just 2 edges with the same lateral coordinates. Instead, there are 3 edges, a long edge and 2 short edges. And notice that the 2 short edges connect at a point that lies exactly on the bigger edge. Because of that, we're going to call that point an edge vertex. In general, we'll define an edge vertex as a triangle vertex that's intended to lie laterally on another triangle's edge. So it's not meant to coincide with the other triangle's vertices, but instead be somewhere in the middle of the triangle's edge. And it doesn't have to lie exactly on the edge, but just be intended to lie on the edge. So in theory, it could miss by a little. Now going back to the structure, we can see that the edge vertex here does lie exactly on the bigger edge. And because of that, there are no gaps between the bigger edge and the 2 smaller edges. In the 3D view on the left, that means that this edge vertex is laterally aligned with this edge. And just to clarify, I could mark the edge vertex here or here. It doesn't really matter because those 2 points are basically guaranteed to line up with each other. So laterally, they're like the same point. So going forward, we'll consider them to be the same edge vertex and I'll only be marking one of them. Okay, so let's clear all of that, put the structure back to a top-down view, and now let's rotate it again. This time, you may notice something funky is going on with the edge vertex on the unit grid. So let's stop it here. And now same question. Are there any gaps between the edges? Interestingly, in this case, there is a gap. And that's because the edge vertex is no longer exactly on the lower edge. And how could it be? Because remember, triangle vertices must have integer coordinates, but there are no integer coordinates that lie exactly on the lower edge. Earlier, when the structure was cardinally aligned, it was easy to find an integer coordinate exactly on the edge, because the edge went through so many. But now, since we're at a weird angle, the edge doesn't go through any integer coordinates, and so it's literally impossible for the edge vertex to lie on the edge. Instead, it just has to pick integer coordinates that are close to the edge. That means there are two cases. Case 1, the edge vertex overshoots and causes the floors to overlap. Floors overlapping like this is perfectly fine and won't cause any invisible walls. And then case 2, the edge vertex undershoots and causes a gap between the floors. And when there's a gap like this, then we have some problems. Remember, the triangle area itself doesn't represent where Mario can stand. Instead, we have our little process for figuring that out, so let's do that again here. First, we mark all integer points that are within the floor or on the floor bounds. Then add the arrows, and finally, fill in the unit squares. Now you can see the issue. There are two integer points that aren't inside any floors. Consequently, their unit squares are not considered to be floor. Instead, we call them floor gaps. And so basically, any structure that resembles this could have floor gaps. Instead of this, it could look like this, or like this, or like this. It doesn't take very much. You just need a seam between floors, usually with a wall in it, and for the floor edges on either side of the seam to be subdivided differently. That causes there to be an edge vertex, which as we discussed is a vertex meant to lie on another triangle's edge, specifically a triangle on the other side of the seam. But if the structure is at a weird angle, then the edge vertex might be misaligned from its edge, causing there to be floor gaps. So to recap, we looked at 4 scenarios: whether there was no edge vertex or there was an edge vertex, and whether the structure was cardinally aligned or at a weird angle. And only when there was an edge vertex at a weird angle did we get floor gaps. So those are the 2 main ingredients. Now I think it would also be useful to look at floor gaps from the side. So let's take this structure, put it sideways, and now take the cross section of the steps. And to make this easier to work with, I'm going to make the wall a little taller and extend the floors. Now as we saw in the previous demonstration, there's some geometry that can cause these 2 points to be misaligned, meaning that the wall triangle can end up slanted. So what we're going to do here is look at 5 different alignments of the upper point in order to examine 5 different slants of the wall triangle. The 5 slants are leaning very far back, leaning a little back, perfectly vertical, leaning a little forwards, and leaning very far forwards. We're going to see which ones cause there to be floor gaps and what happens in those cases. So let's start with perfectly vertical. In this case, the 2 floors are exactly flush. Now for each case, we're going to see what happens when we show the out of bounds area. So first let's add the floor hitboxes, and then let's let the out of bounds area propagate upwards to see where it fills. In this case, the floors cover all of the out of bounds, which means all the area above is habitable. So I'll give this case a happy face. Then next, let's look at leaning very far back. Interestingly, when the wall triangle is this slanted, it actually gets classified as a ceiling. And this happens in the game. There are triangles that are meant to be walls but are just a little too slanted, and so they're actually ceilings. For example, in Cool Mountain, there's this ceiling. So even though it looks like a wall, you can't kick on it or do any other wall interactions with it. And then in Rainbow Ride, there's this ceiling. It's meant to be part of the big house's wall, but because it's just a little too slanted, it's actually a ceiling. So we'll call these wall-like ceilings because they're ceilings that look like walls and are meant to be walls. So going back to our demonstration, let's see what happens when we show the hitboxes again. Like before, the floors still cover all of the out of bounds. In fact, we have some floor overlap in the middle, so there's floor to spare. So this case gets a happy face. Then next, let's look at leaning a little back. Here, the wall triangle is still a wall, just a slightly leaning wall. If we show the hitboxes again, we can see that the floors still cover all of the out of bounds, with a little bit of floor to spare. So this case gets a happy face. Though, one big caveat here is that this angle is not to scale. In reality, walls can only tilt about this much while still being a wall. but I didn't want the arrows to be really crammed together. So in these visuals, we're just gonna pretend that walls can tilt this much and still be a wall for the sake of convenience. Then next, let's skip ahead and look at leaning very far forwards. Now the wall triangle is so slanted the other way that it gets classified as a floor. And this happens in the game too. For example, in Bob on Battlefield, the side of this third step has a floor triangle that's meant to be a wall. But because it's a floor, you can walk on it and slide on it. In Bowser in the Dark World, the side of this little bridge has a floor triangle. In Bowser in the Fire Sea, the side of this platform has floor triangles. And in the castle courtyard, the side of this structure has a floor triangle. So for these ones, we'll call them wall-like floors. But what effect does this have in our demonstration? Well, first let's show the floor hitboxes. You can see that the original two floors are now separated a bit, but luckily, this new floor covers the area in between. So if we show the out of bounds area, we can see that the three floors together cover all of the out of bounds. So this case gets a happy face. And then finally, let's look at leaning a little forwards. Here, the wall triangle is still a wall, just a slightly leaning wall. Now let's show the floor hitboxes. The two original floors are still separated a bit, but now there's no third floor to cover the area in between. All we have is a wall there, but walls don't cover out of bounds. It's like the wall took on the responsibility of a floor, but doesn't actually have the powers of a floor. And so if we show the out of bounds area, we can see that a tiny sliver of out of bounds leaks through the leaning wall. And that sliver of out of bounds would be classified as an invisible wall. This type of invisible wall has caused a lot of frustration over the years. Like, think about this kind of invisible wall compared to the previous three causes that we looked at. These three causes aren't actually that annoying. For the walls with no texture, those are put there intentionally to prevent you from going to places that you're not supposed to go to. So they don't really get in the way when you're going to places that you are supposed to go to. For the ceiling hitboxes, those are mainly just above rooms and inside enclosed structures, which are places that you don't normally interact with. Well, aside from the arches in the Tall Tall Mountain slide and the bridge flaps in Cool Cool Mountain, those ones can get in your way. And then for out of bounds on the course edge, you know where those are, and it's not like they're in the way because they're only on the edges of the course. But for this most recent type of invisible wall, it's just in the middle of the course out in the open. It could even be on the path that you're supposed to use, so you might just bonk on it out of nowhere while you're trying to beat the game. So this type of invisible wall, along with the rest that we're going to cover, are in some sense the real invisible walls, because they're the ones that frustrate players and give a bad name to invisible walls. So I'm going to give this case an angry face. So to summarize, we looked at 5 possible slants of the wall triangle, and only a wall that's leaning slightly forwards causes there to be a floor gap that lets out of bounds leak through. If we move the upper vertex around continuously, you can see that it's only a very narrow range that lets the out of bounds leak through. Basically, the wall triangle has to be leaning forward so that there's a gap between the lower floor and upper floor, but the wall can't be leaning too far forwards or else it acts as a floor that covers that gap. Now I think it would also be useful to see what each of these 5 cases looks like from a top-down view. When the wall leans very far back, the floors overlap. You can tell because the overlap area is an extra dark shade of blue. When the wall leans a little back, there's still a floor overlap, but a bit smaller in area. When the wall's perfectly vertical, there's no floor overlap or floor gap. The whole thing is just a uniform shade of blue. When the wall leans a little forwards, now there's a floor gap. You can tell because there's some white in the middle of all the blue. And remember, that white area is actually covered by the wall triangle, but that doesn't really do anything. And finally, when the wall leans very far forwards, then the wall turns into a floor which covers the gap. So yeah, it's only the one case that causes floor gaps. But interestingly, floor gaps don't necessarily cause invisible walls. See, there are actually 3 cases for what effect a floor gap has because it depends on what's below the floor gap. Case 1, there's another floor below the floor gap. In this case, Mario can freely jump over the floor gap and not hit any invisible walls. He can also go into the floor gap and fall through to the floor below, assuming there are no wall hitboxes in the way. Then case 2, there are no floors below the floor gap. Like we saw a second ago, this lets a tiny sliver of out of bounds leak through. If Mario jumps into that sliver, he'll bonk, and if he walks into it, he'll push. And then case 3, there's a ceiling below the floor gap. This ceiling has a lower hitbox, but we don't care about that. It's the upper hitbox that causes a tiny sliver of ceiling to leak through. So this would also count as an exposed ceiling hitbox. And just like the sliver of out of bounds, the sliver of ceiling lets us bonk on it and lets us push on it. So it's only case 2 and case 3 that cause invisible walls. Now if you ever encounter an invisible wall like this, it might not be obvious whether it's from out of bounds or from a ceiling. Since you know, invisible walls are invisible, so in the game, we wouldn't see the hitbox colors that I'm showing here. But remember, only ceilings cut short your upwards trajectory. So a quick and simple way to distinguish between these two cases is to jump up into the invisible wall. If it lets you jump up, then it's out of bounds, and if it stops you from jumping up, then it's a ceiling. So let's look at an example. In Bob on Battlefield, there's this wall on a floor seam. Here are the floor edges on both sides of the seam, which are subdivided differently due to the steps. And based on those, here are the edge vertices. Now you may be wondering why it looks like I'm showing the same thing on the left and the right. Well, they're actually different camera modes. See, the one on the left is a perspective view, meaning that things get smaller as they go farther away from the camera. So it's like the normal camera mode that you'd see in the game. In contrast, the one on the right is an orthographic view, meaning that things stay the same size regardless of how far away from the camera they are. This orthographic view is useful because it allows us to have a nice looking top-down view. So next, let's show all the course's floor triangles, and now we're going to zoom in on each edge vertex to see how it misses its edge. Like, does it cause a floor overlap or a floor gap? The way this one misses is by causing a floor gap, because you can see the white area between the floors. Then for the next edge vertex, it also causes a floor gap. And for the last one, this one's a little weird. See, the bottom of the step and the top of the step don't actually line up, even though they were meant to. That's what actually causes the side of that third step to be a floor instead of a wall, like we saw before. But anyway, this just means we have 2 edge vertices to look at instead of 1, and they both cause floor gaps. So let's zoom out a little, and now you can see that there are integer coordinates that lie on the white area between floors, meaning that those points are out of bounds. Now let's remove the triangle fill color so that we can mark which unit squares are out of bounds. For each of those integer coordinates, let's add the arrow facing away from the origin, and then fill in those unit squares with gray for out of bounds. And now let's pan across the seam so that we can see all of the unit squares of out of bounds. So each of the unit squares on the right represents a little sliver of out of bounds that leaks through the leaning wall. And as we're panning on the right, I'm adding these slivers on the left so that you can see them in 3D. They're basically square columns that are 1 unit wide, though I'm drawing them each as 1 pixel wide because that's what's easiest to see. So that's the whole seam. Interestingly, there's one point near the middle of the seam that lies on the x-axis. So that point has 2 arrows and causes 2 unit squares of invisible wall. So yeah, that's how the out of bounds units are distributed along the seam. On the left, if we zoom in a bit, you can see the 2 unit columns in the middle that are extra close together, since they're both from that point on the x-axis. And if we step back a little, you can see just how high up this invisible wall goes, all the way to the top of the course, at a height of 32,768. So it's pretty weird. There's just this invisible wall in the course that goes way higher up than anything else. And of course, because it's an invisible wall, that means anytime you go through that spot, you may end up bonking on it seemingly out of nowhere. On the other hand, you may end up passing right through it. So why is it that you only hit it sometimes? Well, let me explain. Here's a top-down view of the unit grid, and let's say we have invisible wall units on a seam like this. Now normally, invisible wall units are at a slanted angle, but just to keep this demonstration simple, we're going to say that they're all in a nice row like this. And let's say Mario's currently south of the invisible wall seam and wants to cross it going north. Now it's important to understand exactly how Mario's movement works. So Mario has a horizontal speed, which represents how many units forwards he moves per frame. For example, if Mario's speed is 8, then he moves 8 units forwards per frame. But even that's a bit of an oversimplification because the game doesn't move Mario forwards all at once. Instead, it takes his speed and subdivides it into 4 equal pieces called quarter steps. So a speed of 8 would be subdivided into 4 quarter steps, each having a size of 2. Then on each frame, Mario moves forwards by 4 quarter steps. So in the game, you'd see Mario before he does the 4 quarter steps, you'd see Mario after he does the 4 quarter steps, but you wouldn't see him at these intermediate positions because they happen mid-frame. But I'll still show them here because they're very relevant for this discussion. So here, I'm making full steps pink and quarter steps yellow so that it's easy to distinguish them. Earlier, when I showed movement arrows, they were kind of a mishmash between quarter steps and full steps because I was simplifying. But you see, it's only every full step that Mario's animation updates and gravity applies, while it's every quarter step that floors, walls, ceilings, and out of bounds apply. Since here, we're interested in whether Mario hits invisible wall units, which are ceilings and out of bounds, we're only going to focus on the quarter step arrows. And I'll add even more arrows to his pathing, because we're interested in whether he hits the invisible wall at any point in his pathing, not just on the next frame. Anyway, since Mario's moving forwards 2 units at a time, that covers every second unit. That means there are 2 kinds of spacings, a spacing like this and a spacing that's offset by 1 unit like this. You can think of them as one covers the even unit squares and one covers the odd unit squares. If we look at the invisible wall seam, you can see that the pathing on the left skips straight over the seam while the pathing on the right hits it. Since invisible walls stop your movement, I'll remove all the arrows after the collision and put this symbol at the collision point. So in this example, there's a 50% chance that we hit the invisible wall, since 1 out of every 2 spacings hits it. Another way to see this is if we take just one of the spacings and move the starting point continuously. You can see that half the time it makes it through and half the time it stops. So that's why invisible walls can seem sort of random. Even though they're always there and don't move, you're not guaranteed to hit them when you cross the seam. Instead, it just comes down to whether your spacing crosses over it or goes into it. So in theory, you could always avoid hitting them by controlling your spacing just right, but in practice, at least casually, that's way too precise to control. But luckily, there are some other factors that are easier to control that also affect how often you hit an invisible wall. For example, your speed. So far, we've just been working with a speed of 8, which has quarter steps of size 2. But let's double that to 16 speed, which has quarter steps of size 4. This time we have 4 different spacings, which you can think of as covering all the unit squares that are a multiple of 4, 1 more than a multiple of 4, 2 more than a multiple of 4, and 3 more than a multiple of 4. There wouldn't be any more than that, because like, if we added a 5th one, 4 more than a multiple of 4, then really, it's just the same spacing as the first case, but starting 1 quarter step forwards. But anyway, you can see that only one of the 4 spacings hits the invisible wall, meaning that there's a 1/4 chance of hitting it. And just like before, we can also see this by taking one of the spacings and moving it continuously. Most of the time it makes it through, but 1/4 of the time it hits the invisible wall and stops. So at 8 speed, there was a 50% chance of hitting the invisible wall, and at 16 speed, there was only a 25% chance of hitting it. So basically, the faster Mario's moving, the smaller the chance of hitting the invisible wall. Because more speed means your quarter steps cover more distance, and then they're more likely to pass right over the invisible wall units. Separately, your chance of hitting the invisible wall also depends on Mario's angle to the invisible wall seam. Currently, we're moving perpendicularly to the seam, which is optimal if you're trying to avoid hitting the invisible wall. So that'll be the control case, and we'll compare it to this case of Mario turned at an angle. At this angle, each quarter step moves 3.5 units to the right and 2 units forwards. Now if you think about this, the 3.5 units to the right doesn't contribute towards crossing the seam, and so it's like that part of the movement is going to waste at this angle. It's only the 2 units forwards that makes progress towards crossing the seam. If we move both cases vertically, you can see that the angled case hits the invisible wall twice as much as the control case, since the control case moves forwards 4 units at a time, while the angled case moves forwards only 2 units at a time. So even though they're the same speed, the angle changes how much of your speed contributes towards getting past the invisible wall. Going perpendicularly uses all of the speed to try to get past the invisible wall, while a slanted angle only uses a component of the speed to try to get past it. And now watch this. If we make Mario's angle even more slanted, now he moves 3.9 units to the right and only 1 unit forwards. Since the invisible wall is 1 unit thick, that means Mario can't even cross it now. See, no matter where he starts, his quarter steps just don't move forwards enough to cross the seam. So to recap so far, if you're trying to avoid hitting an invisible wall, then you should be moving at a fast speed and moving perpendicularly to the seam. But if you're trying to hit the invisible wall, then you should be moving at a slow speed and moving nearly parallel to the seam. But there are also properties of the invisible wall itself that affect how often you'd hit it. Up until now, we've just been looking at the simplest example of an invisible wall, which is a 1 unit thick continuous seam. But invisible walls often don't look like this. For example, maybe we have an invisible wall that looks like this, where it's 2 units thick. Now if we look at all the spacings, we can see that 2 of the 4 spacings hit it, which is a 50% chance. In other words, the thicker the invisible wall is, the higher the chance of hitting it. On the other hand, we might instead have something more like this, where only every second unit on the seam is an invisible wall. Now, not only do we have 4 possible vertical spacings, but we have 2 possible horizontal spacings, because you may or may not line up with an invisible wall unit. To illustrate this, we can subdivide each of the existing cases into 2 cases. So now, we have 4 different classes of vertical spacings, 3 of them cross right over the seam, but 1 of them lands on the seam directly. Not necessarily on an invisible wall unit, but just on the seam. And separately, we have 2 different classes of horizontal spacings. One of them passes between the invisible wall units, while the other one lines up with an invisible wall unit. So in total, that's 8 possible spacings, only 1 of which hits the invisible wall. So there's a 1 in 8 chance of hitting it. Another way of saying it is, there's a 1 in 4 chance that we land on the seam, and a 1 in 2 chance that we line up with an invisible wall unit, so multiply those together and you get that there's a 1 in 8 chance of hitting the invisible wall. And note that this is in comparison to before when it was a continuous seam, where we had a 1/4 chance of hitting it. But now that it's half as dense, we only have half that chance of hitting it, which is 1/8. So basically, the denser the invisible wall is, the higher the chance of hitting it. And finally, many invisible walls don't even have a uniform spacing along the whole seam. For example, maybe it's more dense on the left and less dense on the right. In this case, trying to cross it on the left side is more likely to hit it, and trying to cross it on the right side is less likely to hit it. So yeah, that's the basics of interacting with this kind of invisible wall. That should help you understand and appreciate the rest of the examples as we go through them. Now, I'm not just going to show you a few examples and call it a day. That's not how we do things here. Instead, I'm going to show you every invisible wall in the game, for a few reasons. First, I want this video to serve as a reference guide for every invisible wall, showing where they are and what they look like. That way, the next time you bump into one, you can come back here and see exactly why it's there. And second, I want to show you just how prevalent invisible walls are, and just how glitchy this game is. That way, you won't feel so bad about bumping into invisible walls. They're so abundant that you didn't really stand a chance. So, if you do want to see every example, because you want to know every inch of this game's weirdness, then you can just sit back and relax as I break it all down for you. And if you don't want to watch all the examples, because you see some of them and get the gist of it, that's fine too. You can skip forward to the next section using YouTube's chapter system. And so now, let's get into the examples. So also in Bob on Battlefield, we have this wall on the bar fence. Based on how its edges are subdivided, it has one edge vertex on the bottom, which misses its edge by causing a floor gap. And so that means that all along this seam are units of out of bounds. Note that the density of this invisible wall varies along the seam, and there are even some gaps in it. And so basically, if you ever go above this bar fence, you may end up bonking on this invisible wall. And remember earlier when I showed that you could bonk inside a ceiling hitbox and get reflected every frame? Well, you can also do that on this kind of invisible wall, essentially by wedging yourself between 2 of the unit columns. Playing it again, if we pause it and zoom in, we can see exactly what's going on. So on this frame, Mario does a quarter step going forwards as part of the dive action. This quarter step lands on a unit square of out of bounds, so it gets cancelled and Mario bonks. Though note that Mario's bonking animation is 1 frame behind what it should be, so on the left it doesn't quite look like he bonked yet. I mean, you can see the star particles, but his animation is still diving. But he's bonking, so next he moves backwards a quarter step, which also lands on a unit square of out of bounds, so that gets cancelled too, and Mario reflects his angle. And now since he's still bonking, he does another quarter step backwards the other way, which also lands on a unit square of out of bounds. So that quarter step gets cancelled and causes another reflection. And now we're back to the same state as before, so it just repeats over and over. Mario just bounces back and forth between those 2 unit squares. So yeah, that's why that can happen. Then still in Bob on Battlefield, we have this wall on the far side of the gap in the mountain path. It has 2 edge vertices on the top. Interestingly, the left edge vertex causes a floor overlap, so that's fine, but the edge vertex on the right causes a floor gap, which is where the problem is. So near that right edge vertex, we have some unit columns of out of bounds, specifically 2 groups of them. Now this invisible wall is especially evil because if you hit it, you fall into the gap. Like, I can't imagine a worse place in Bob on Battlefield to have an invisible wall than on the far side of a gap you have to jump over. Then even still in Bob on Battlefield, we have this wall right after the bridge on the mountain path. It's kind of a weird shape, but it has one edge vertex on the top near the bridge. This edge vertex misses its edge by causing a floor gap, which means that there are some unit columns of out of bounds near the bridge. And interestingly, if we zoom in on the bridge, you can see that some of the unit columns actually rise up into the bridge, and so they stop there instead of continuing to rise up. But anyway, that means that for this gap too, if you try to jump over it, you may end up hitting this invisible wall and falling into the gap. And one more in Bob on Battlefield, we have this wall below the upper alcove in the mountain. It has two edge vertices. Zooming in, we can see that the right one causes a floor overlap and the left one causes a floor gap. So the result is that mainly on the left side of the alcove, we have some unit columns of out of bounds, and these ones are fully contained within the alcove. So this means anytime you enter or exit this alcove, you might bonk on this invisible wall. Then in Jolly Roger Bay, we have this wall on the right side of this alcove. It has one edge vertex on the top. Will there be a floor overlap or a floor gap? It's a floor gap. I mean, it has to be. Otherwise, why would we be here examining it? Now, a cool thing about this one is that it only has 4 unit columns of out of bounds, so you can see each one of them individually. And since this one's in water, we can swim into it, which cancels our movement, and so we just end up swimming in place. So it looks pretty odd. Then in the Jolly Roger Bay ship, we've got a lot going on. So first, there's this lowest platform that has a wall with an edge vertex, and so it has an invisible wall on its edge. Then next, we have this slightly higher platform. Very similar thing going on here, because the bottom of this wall has an edge vertex leading to another invisible wall. Then on one of the higher platforms, we have yet another wall with an edge vertex that causes an invisible wall. So that makes 3 platforms with invisible walls, but can we get a 4th one? And yes, we can, on the highest platform of them all. This time, the wall's a slightly different shape and there are only 3 unit columns of out of bounds. So yeah, those are the 4 platforms with this type of invisible wall. So if you thought climbing up these platforms was hard on its own, just remember that out of nowhere you might bonk on one of these invisible walls. But hey, at least now you know where they are so you can avoid them. Or hit them on purpose if that's what you're into. I'm not here to judge. Then in Cool Cool Mountain, we have this wall. It's like an upside down triangle, so it has one edge vertex on the bottom. Now if we show all the floors except the death barrier, you can see that there are some floor gaps. But this time, they're filled with ceiling instead of out of bounds. Because if we look on the bottom of this structure, we can see the ceiling down here, whose upper hitbox leaks through those floor gaps. So what that means is that all along the seam, there are unit columns of ceiling leaking through. Now as a general rule, in courses with death barriers, all the invisible walls coming out of floor gaps will be due to ceilings and not out of bounds. Because think about it, if the course has a death barrier, then the whole thing is protected from out of bounds. That means you wouldn't find out of bounds anywhere in the main part of the course. And it's not like the course geometry can generate its own out of bounds, that's not how that works. Here's another way to think about it. Let's say we have a floor and it has a floor gap in it. In order for this floor gap to have out of bounds under it, there would have to be no floor under it, because that's what out of bounds means. But even if the main part of the course doesn't have any floors under it, the death barrier is still guaranteed to be a floor under it. So it's just not possible to have out of bounds come out of the floor gap. Instead, the only way for there to be an invisible wall coming out of the floor gap would be if there's a ceiling hitbox leaking through it, because courses can generate their own ceiling hitboxes. Now let me clarify how jumping into ceiling columns works. Basically, there are 3 cases. Case 1, you move into the ceiling column while falling down. In this case, your quarter step gets cancelled and you bonk, assuming you're moving fast enough. Then case 2, you move into the ceiling column while moving upwards. Then your quarter step gets cancelled and the ceiling cuts short your upwards trajectory, meaning you'll now start falling down. But then let's say you missed the ceiling column on the next frame, either because your speed changed or you're holding a slightly different angle on the control stick. Then you'll pass right through the invisible wall and continue with your trajectory, though it'll now be moving downwards. And then case 3, you move into the ceiling column while moving upwards, so your quarter step gets cancelled and it cuts short your upwards trajectory, and then you hit the ceiling column again on the next frame with your downwards trajectory. Then just like the first case, your quarter step gets cancelled and you bonk, assuming you're moving fast enough. So it kinda looks like you went straight from moving upwards to bonking, but it was actually a 2-frame process because of the way ceilings work. So yeah, those are the 3 main interactions that can happen when you jump into a seam of ceiling hitbox. So going back to the game, let me show you what these interactions look like. So first I hit the ceiling while moving downwards, which causes me to bonk. Next I hit it while moving upwards and then miss it afterwards, so it cuts short my triple jump. And then I hit it 2 frames in a row, so it looks like I go straight from moving upwards to bonking, but it actually took 2 frames. And like I mentioned earlier, an easy way to confirm that this invisible wall is a ceiling is to just walk into it and then try jumping. You can see that my jumps don't go anywhere, meaning it's a ceiling. On the other hand, if we push against an invisible wall that's out of bounds and then try jumping, the jumps actually go up. Then next in Cool Mountain, we have this wall. It's a pretty interesting shape because there's like a little overhang structure on the right, and here are the relevant edge vertices. So the first one misses by causing a floor gap, then a floor overlap. Now let's zoom out and hide some of the lower floors to make this next part easier to see. So then we have a floor overlap, and the last one is a floor gap. And based on our earlier discussion, you should already know that these ones are going to be ceiling leaking through and not out of bounds, since Cool Mountain has a death barrier. Now you can see that there are 2 sections of invisible wall. The section on the left is due to this ceiling on the underside of the wood, and the section on the right is due to this ceiling on the underside of the overhang. So these invisible walls could get in your way if you're doing movement near the red coin star. And remember, the bridge flap invisible wall is around here too, so surely there wouldn't be a third one around here, right? Well, also in Cool Mountain, there's this wall, right next door to the previous one we looked at. Now this wall is actually made up of 2 floors, 2 ceilings, and 2 walls. And it's the big wall on the left that's the issue. It's another triangle, so it has 1 edge vertex on the bottom. This edge vertex misses the edge by causing a floor gap, resulting in 2 sections of invisible wall. The section on the right is due to this ceiling triangle that we've been looking at the whole time, and the section on the left is due to this ceiling down here, you know, the top of the little cave. And so basically, if you're messing around near the blue coins, you might just bump into this invisible wall. Now this invisible wall is interesting because it's actually used in the task for collecting 100 coins while doing the big penguin race, which was tasked by Crackhex. See, she uses the invisible wall to backwards long jump in order to get lots of speed. That makes for a quick trip back up the mountain to enter the cabin for the penguin race. Now I've talked about backwards long jumping a couple times, but I haven't really explained it, so let me do that now. So Mario has a move called a long jump that you can do by pressing Z and then A while you're moving. Now the cool thing about a long jump is that when you start it, it multiplies your speed by 1.5. Let me show this on the graph. If we start with 1 speed and then continuously long jump, our speed increases by more and more each time. Because each time it multiplies by 1.5, or in other words, gets 50% bigger. Now the programmers didn't want you to be able to get infinite speed this way, so they capped it at a maximum of 48 speed. So a long jump will never go above 48 speed. But the programmers made a little oversight because they forgot about the negative numbers. So let's say we start with -1 speed. Now if we start continuously long jumping, our speed will decrease by more and more, since multiplying by 1.5 just makes these negative numbers more negative. And this time there's no cap, because the programmers never put a minimum speed that a long jump can do. So basically, we can get unlimited negative speed by long jumping backwards. And so we call it a backwards long jump, or BLJ. Now, doing backwards long jumps doesn't automatically result in unlimited negative speed. That's because even though the starting speed of a long jump is uncapped, Mario loses speed while he's in the air from the long jump. So trying to backwards long jump on a flat floor with nothing else won't work, because Mario loses too much speed in the air. Looking at the speed value, you can see that I get to -20 speed right after starting a long jump, but then it goes back to -15 by the time I land and can do the next long jump. To avoid losing all this speed, we need to do a bunch of backwards long jumps in quick succession. So you can do this on a steep floor, because then each long jump lands back on the floor instantly, and so you can do a bunch of long jumps in a row without any airtime. You can also do it on a rising platform, because the platform rises into your jump, so you land instantly and can then backwards long jump again. And finally, you can do it using a ceiling, because the ceiling makes you land instantly instead of letting you jump up. See, it's all coming together. So going back to the Cool Mountain task, let's pause it, zoom in, and now I'll show Mario's movement arrows. And I'll make the arrows green if they're on the first frame of a long jump. So you can see that each backwards long jump was strategically done to move into a ceiling column, which prevents Mario from jumping up and instead makes him land right after. That allows Mario to do the next backwards long jump right away, and so he's able to build up speed very quickly by doing that. So see, invisible walls can actually be helpful for something. Then in Big Boo's Haunt, we have this wall on a seam between floors. Now you might be wondering what floor the magenta line belongs to. Well, there are actually some invisible, intangible floor triangles in this room covering the giant gap in the floor. So why are they there? Well, you see, when Mario's in a course with rooms, like Big Boo's Haunt, then only 1 or 2 rooms are active at a time. Specifically, the game activates the room that Mario's in and any room that he's next to the door of. And the way the game figures out which rooms to activate is based on the floor triangle that Mario's above. So to put it simply, if Mario's above a floor in room A, then room A will be active. If he's above a floor in room B, then room B will be active. And if he's above a sort of intermediate floor, usually next to a door, then both room A and room B will be active. Now this system works pretty well, but think about how it would work in this room. The thing about this room is that there's a big gap in the floor that leads to the room down below. Since Mario's current room is based on which floor he's above, in theory that would mean jumping over the gap would change your room to the room down below. That'd be bad because then the room down below would be active instead of the upper room, even though you're still in that upper room. So to solve this, the programmers did 2 things. First, they added some invisible, intangible floors here that belong to this upper room. That way, even if you're above the gap, your floor triangle is still a floor from this upper room, and so the upper room stays active. And second, a bit lower down, they added a second layer of invisible, intangible floors. These floors are intermediate floors, meaning they activate both the upper room and lower room. So when Mario falls into the gap, first the upper room is active, then both the upper room and lower room are active, and then only the lower room is active. So yeah, that's why these floors are here. And now let's resume the visual, which reveals that there are floor gaps. But this time, it's not ceiling or out of bounds that's below the floor gaps. Remember earlier, I said there were 3 cases for floor gaps. So far, we've only seen case 2, which is out of bounds, and case 3, which is a ceiling. But now, it's our first time seeing case 1, where there's a floor gap with a floor under it. So it's not actually an invisible wall, though it does stem from the same cause. So in our demonstration, that means each of these floor gaps has a floor under it, so I'll put blue points to represent that. And remember, these are floor gaps in the upper intangible floor. So when Mario goes above these floor gaps, his new floor is the lower intangible floor. So doing that causes the lower room to also activate and hides the objects in the upper room, like the Boo and red coin. So that's why out of nowhere, the Boo can just teleport back to its starting position while you're in this room. And finally, since it's a floor gap with a floor under it, we can just jump into it and fall down to the room below.
What? What the hell? Did anyone just see that?
Then in Hazy Maze Cave, we have this mesh ceiling that you're supposed to swing across. If you're not familiar with it, there's this path on the right that's just a dead end, there's this path in the middle that leads to an item block with a 1-up in it, and there's this path on the left that leads to the star. Now this one isn't actually an invisible wall, and it's not even a floor gap, it's a ceiling gap. Because remember, all the properties about floor detection also apply to ceilings, so they can have edge vertices that cause gaps too. And the reason these ceiling gaps matter is because if you're swinging across the mesh and move into a ceiling gap, then you fall off the mesh. So anyway, on this mesh structure, we have these 4 edge vertices that lie on this edge, we have this edge vertex that lies on this edge, and we have this edge vertex that lies on this edge. So first let's look at the seam on the dead end path. Its edge vertex causes a ceiling overlap, which means that there's no problem here. So there's no risk of falling off if you explore the dead end. Then next, let's look at the seam at the start of the 1-up path. This one has 2 edge vertices, the right one causes a ceiling overlap, and the left one also causes a ceiling overlap. So this seam is also fine. Now let's look at the seam near the end of the 1-up path. Its edge vertex misses by causing a ceiling gap, meaning that there are ceiling gaps all along this seam. And I'm making them orange because we need a new color for ceiling gaps, and I'm kind of running out of colors here. Then next, let's look at the seam at the start of the star path. Just 1 edge vertex, which misses by causing a ceiling gap. So on this seam too, there are ceiling gaps that could make you fall off. Not very good, since this is the path to the star, like the one path you have to take. And finally, let's look at the seam near the end of the star path. Just 1 edge vertex again, and this one also causes a ceiling gap, which is extra not good because that means the path to the star has 2 seams of ceiling gaps, which like I said, can make you fall off out of nowhere. So in total, the mesh has 3 seams of ceiling gaps, 1 on the path to the 1-up and 2 on the path to the star. You know, this whole thing kind of feels like one of those carnival games that's secretly rigged against you. Like, they let you practice your swinging skills on the dead end to let you get the hang of it and build up your confidence. Cause there's no risk of falling off there, that one's perfectly safe. So then you try testing your skill on the 1-up path. There are no ceiling gaps near the beginning of it because they want to make you think you have a chance. But then right at the end is the trap to make you fall off. Here I hit a ceiling gap and fall down, but luckily I still land on the platform. And finally, if you want to go for the big prize, the star, well now it's double rigged against you. These first ceiling gaps are less dense on the right side, so that's the safer side to go on. And the second group of ceiling gaps is less dense on the left side, so that's what I recommend there. Though here, I still end up hitting it and falling down, which could easily lead to your death if you're not expecting it. And also, because these are ceiling gaps, that means it's possible to just jump right up into the gap, because the ceiling doesn't block you there. Here's what jumping into the gap looks like in the game. And just for good measure, I bonk in there to show that I'm surrounded by ceiling hitbox. Then in Lethal Lava Land, we have this arched platform. Its shape is like a breeding ground for edge vertices. Look at it, we have 7 of them. So let's see, we have a floor overlap, floor overlap, floor overlap, floor overlap, floor gap, floor gap, floor gap. So mainly on the right side, we have a bunch of unit columns of out of bounds that leak out. But we can't forget about the other side of the structure, because on this side, we have something very similar going on. 7 edge vertices. Looking at these ones, we have a floor overlap, floor overlap, floor overlap, floor overlap, floor gap, floor gap, floor gap. So it's actually the same pattern on this side that it was on the other side. But yeah, be careful if you're on this structure. And when Mario does a lava boost, he's able to reflect off of out of bounds, which means we can wedge Mario between unit columns to make him reflect every frame, just like earlier with the bonking. Then in the volcano in Lethal Lava Land, we have these flare triangles near the lava fall, which have an edge vertex between them. So this is a rare case when it involves a seam between floors without there being a wall on the seam. But we can analyze it just the same and see that the edge vertex causes a floor gap. So there's not even a wall over the floor gap this time, there's just nothing there. And that's why we get unit columns of out of bounds, which extend all the way up to near this upper path. So if you try to take a shortcut by jumping over the gap, you could just end up bonking on this invisible wall and falling down. And the cool thing about this one is that it's actually used in the A button challenge, you know, where your goal is to not press A. See, bouncing off the invisible wall helps you redirect your momentum when you're doing lava boosts up the lava fall, which lets you get all the way over to the star platform without having to press A at all. Then in Dire Dire Docks, we have this wall near the 5 yellow coins. Based on the edges, it doesn't look like there should be any edge vertices here. It just looks like 2 edges that should laterally align. But what you don't see is that the floor on the bottom is bigger than you'd think and extends behind the wall. So really, the bottom edge looks like this, which means we have 2 edge vertices on the top. Now this one's weird because the edges are not at a weird angle, they're cardinally aligned, which means that it was completely doable to put these edge vertices exactly on the edge. But for whatever reason, they miss. And so we end up with a 2-unit thick continuous seam of invisible wall, which makes this one pretty egregious. Like, if you cross over this seam, you're very likely to hit this invisible wall, compared to the other ones we've seen whose units are more scattered. So you might bonk on it, you might try to jump up from the water onto the ledge and only manage to ledge grab, and you might try to run off this ledge and end up ledge grabbing instead, because walking into an invisible wall slows down your speed, and walking near a ledge with too little speed makes you drop down into a ledge grab instead of just walking off the edge. Then in Snowman's Land, we have this wall. The top of the wall is subdivided into 2 different edges, so we have an edge vertex between them. And that edge vertex causes an invisible wall. And you can see that some of these unit columns only rise upwards until they meet the icy bridge. But anyway, I guess this invisible wall could actually help you if you were about to accidentally jump off, because then it could bonk you back on. Then another in Snowman's Land, we have this wall near the igloo, though 2 of these triangles are actually ceilings. So here are the edges, and here are the relevant edge vertices. Zooming in on them, we have a floor overlap on the left, and on the right, the vertices miss in a way that causes a floor gap. But just a little one with exactly 2 columns of out of bounds. And you can see that these columns only rise upwards until they meet the icy bridge. So it seems unlikely that anyone's ever hit these ones before, since there's just 2 of them and they're in such a weird spot next to this green wall. Also in Snowman's Land, we have these floor triangles on the snowman's head. Once again, this is a seam between floors with no wall in it, and the floors have an edge vertex that causes a floor gap. But do these floor gaps let through out of bounds or a ceiling? Well, why not both? See, farther down on the snowman, there's a ceiling that covers some of the floor gaps, but not all of them. So floor gaps to the northwest let out of bounds leak through, and floor gaps to the southeast let ceiling leak through. So it's like a hybrid invisible wall, half out of bounds, half ceiling, but 100% trouble, because one bonk on this could send you falling all the way down the snowman, and I mean all the way down. Then still in Snowman's Land, we have this wall near the moving snow mounds. It has two edge vertices on top because the wall is a trapezoid. The left edge vertex does a floor overlap, which is fine, but the right edge vertex does a floor gap, which is the problem. So all along the seam, there are unit columns of out of bounds. So if you're playing around near the snow mounds, you might just bump into this invisible wall. Now there's something very interesting about this invisible wall, which has to do with the snow mounds. If we look at it from the side and take a sort of cross section, you can see that each of the snow mounds actually drops down into the ground and covers the invisible wall for a split second before disappearing. And the extra big snow mound covers it a lot. So this is the only invisible wall where unit columns of out of bounds continuously appear and disappear. And because of that, we can actually have the out of bounds appear into Mario, causing him to die. You get it? Like normally, out of bounds prevents you from going into it, but we can go there when the out of bounds is gone and then it reappears into us. So basically, you can just die out of nowhere. And I should mention, if you go back into bounds, you can move around some more, but the death transition already started and so it'll still take you out of the level. Now you have to wonder, did anyone ever die like this in the history of the game? Surely it would take like 1,000 years before this ever happened to someone by chance, right? Well, wonder no more, because it did happen to a guy named Bebop Bandit live on stream, so let's watch.
And of course I do. Please! Please! For the love of f***ing God! What the hell? Are you f***ing kidding me? What the...
So it just goes to show, when you have so many people playing the game for so many years, crazy rare stuff will happen eventually. And finally in Snowman's Land, we have this wall belonging to the green slope. You know the drill, there's an edge vertex, it misses by causing a floor gap, and so there's unit columns of out of bounds all along the seam. Now you might think this one wouldn't be too bad, because who goes on that green slope? But actually, speedrunners climb over it as a shortcut, so it could definitely cause them to bonk and mess up their run, because now you're sliding all the way down into the water. Then near the top of Tall Tall Mountain, we have this little sliver of a wall. It has one edge vertex on the bottom, and if we look closely at it, we can see that it causes floor gaps. And these are the kind of floor gaps with a floor under them because the death barrier is below them. And so interestingly, we can actually just jump right into one of these floor gaps and go through the mountain, falling all the way down to the death barrier. And these floor gaps are actually used in the A button challenge. See, Mario's able to dive up that seam using the floor gaps, because each floor gap makes him become airborne, which lets him dive again even though he's on a steep floor. And diving straight up this seam is the fastest way to get to the star on top of the mountain. Then in Rainbow Ride, we have this wall on the ship. This one also doesn't look like it should have any edge vertices. It just looks like two edges that laterally align. But if we look at the surface triangle view, you can see that there are multiple floors here. And that's because the floors on the right trigger wind, like most of the ship does, whereas the floors on the left don't trigger wind, probably to let you get up to the star more easily. So because of that extra subdivision of triangles, now we have an edge vertex on the bottom. That edge vertex causes a floor gap, so some unit columns of ceiling leak through, specifically from a ceiling on the bottom of the ship. So I don't know how often you're gonna go right there, but if you do, you could hit this invisible wall. Then in the castle grounds, we have this wall above the steps in the moat. As you'll come to learn, steps are super prone to invisible walls, since each step adds another edge vertex. This one has two, so let's see. The left one causes a little gap, and the right one causes a huge gap. It's off by 6 units. It's like they weren't even trying to align it. And so the result of this is that we get an extra thick invisible wall, at least compared to the other ones we've seen so far. So yeah, you might hit this one if you try jumping into the moat, and good luck if you line up with the extra thick section. And also in the castle grounds, we have this wall near the bridge. Like I said, having steps is likely to cause invisible walls, and this is no exception. So this side of the bridge has some invisible walls. But there's also the other side of the bridge, which also has a wall above these steps. That also causes a bunch of edge vertices, some of which cause floor gaps to the right of the bridge. So on this side too, there are unit columns of out of bounds. So if you ever want to go from one side of the bridge to the other, maybe just walk on the bridge instead of jumping across the corners. You'll thank me later. And then inside the castle, we have the wall above the stairs down to the basement. With this many steps, we have more edge vertices than I know what to do with. Some cause gaps, some cause overlaps, you get the idea. You know, some part of me was like, there can't be invisible walls inside the castle. Like, this is the hub area, our safe haven. But nope, even the hub area can have invisible walls, especially with how many steps there are in the castle. Well, most of the castle steps are cardinally aligned, so they don't have any issues. But the sides of these steps are at a weird angle, which is the problem. So yeah, on both sides of these stairs, there are invisible walls that could get in your way. So watch out for those. Now remember, if you jump up into a ceiling, it cuts short your upwards trajectory and then you fall down. Also remember, if you jump up into out of bounds, the horizontal component of your quarter steps gets cancelled, but you still move vertically. Interestingly, the programmers made an oversight because they never considered what should happen if these two cases occurred together. And so, if you jump up into out of bounds with a ceiling above you, the out of bounds cancels the horizontal component of your movement and you still move vertically, completely ignoring the ceiling. In other words, the ceiling has no effect. You can just go straight up into the ceiling hitbox. Now this invisible wall is made of out of bounds and it extends up into the ceiling. So here, if we jump up into the invisible wall, it lets us pass straight through the ceiling, putting us next to the upstairs key door. This trick was actually used in the 120-star task, since it's the fastest way to go from the courtyard to upstairs. And the last example, in the Snowman's Land room, we have yet another staircase whose sides are at an angle. So lots of edge vertices, and some of them cause floor gaps. And so the result is that we get some unit columns of out of bounds. Not too many, just 8 of them, so watch out for those when you're making your way through this room. So yeah, that's the 4th cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call floor gap due to misaligned edge vertex. And so now, let's look at the 5th cause. So remember that structure we had before, where it was just 2 steps? Let's look at it from above again. Remember, when this structure rotated, the 2 floor edges making up the seam stayed perfectly flush with no gaps between them. But now focus your attention on this vertex of the upper step. If we move this vertex to a slightly different spot, then the 2 floor edges aren't flush anymore. There's a gap between them. And if we do our little process, we can see that there are now floor gaps which could cause invisible walls. And geometry like this happens in the game. There are vertices that are meant to be aligned, but for whatever reason, they're a bit off. You know how the previous cause of invisible walls stemmed from a misaligned edge vertex? That one was at least understandable because the edge vertex had to have integer coordinates so it couldn't be placed exactly on the edge. But in this new case, there's really no excuse. The programmers literally just didn't line up 2 floor vertices that could have easily been lined up, causing there to be floor gaps. So let's look at some examples. In Cool Mountain, we have this wall near the beginning. Here are the floor edges, and we're going to focus on this vertex. So let's go to a top-down view, show the floors, and now zoom in. The vertex I highlighted should have been lined up with this other vertex, but instead of exactly coinciding, we have 2 vertices that are 1 unit apart. And all because the programmers didn't line them up right. So because of that, we have some gaps along the seam. And it's not a ceiling or out of bounds that's below these floor gaps, but another floor, specifically the death barrier. So the result of this is that we're able to jump into these floor gaps, assuming we do it at the corner where the wall is too small to push us away. And by going through this gap, we don't necessarily die, we can actually land all the way down here. That's why this technique is used in the 120-star tasks, because it's the fastest way to get to the wall kicks will work star. Then in Shifting Sands Land, we have these 2 floors in the quicksand, which presumably share a vertex over here. But if we zoom in, we can see that their vertices are actually 5 units apart. That means all along the seam between those 2 triangles, there are unit columns of out of bounds. Not very good, because if you're riding the shell over that seam, then there's a chance your shell might break out of nowhere and you'll die.
Invisawalled?
And it could also mess up your flying, because if you fly into out of bounds, your angle gets redirected downwards. So you might be flying along and suddenly you're redirected downwards into the quicksand.
Pero man, ¿qué es este juego? ¿Por qué te estafa así?
Then in Wet Dry World, we have this wall that lies on a seam between floors. If we focus on the lower right vertex, we can see that it misses the upper right vertex by 1 unit. So all along the seam, there are units of out of bounds that leak out. And so when you're collecting that ring of 8 coins, you might accidentally bonk on this invisible wall. Then in Tall Tall Mountain, we have this wall near the rolling log. We're gonna focus on this vertex on the right, but also there's an edge vertex on the left that we should also look at. So if we zoom in on them, we can see that the edge vertex misses by causing a floor gap, and for the other vertex we highlighted, it's off by where it should be by 1 unit. So all along the seam, unit columns of ceiling leak out from the ceiling on the underside of the structure. And hey, this is the invisible wall that I showed in the intro. Remember that? You were so innocent back then, you had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. Then still in Tall Tall Mountain, we have this wall triangle. Note that the triangle next to it is actually a floor and not a wall. And now we're gonna focus on this vertex. Zooming in on it, we can see that it's off by 1 unit, which means that all along the seam, there are floor gaps with floor under them because the death barrier is below here. And so it's actually possible to just fall right through one of those floor gaps and fall to the death barrier. Now this was the last main example of floor gaps with floor under them, aka the kind of floor gaps you can just jump into. But there are a few other examples that aren't as interesting because you can't jump all the way into them. But they're still worth mentioning, so let's briefly go through them. In Cool Cool Mountain, there's some floor gaps at the start of this bridge, so whenever you walk over this seam, you could enter freefall for a split second if your movement happens to line up with a floor gap. And if you try to fall into one of these floor gaps, the wall pushes you out before you're all the way through. Also in Cool Cool Mountain, there's some floor gaps in the wall kicks will work area at the start of this icy bridge. If you try to enter these, you get pushed to the side by the walls. In Snowman's Land, there are some floor gaps right where this walkway connects to the bully platform. If you try to enter these, you get pushed to the side by the wall. And in Tall Tall Mountain, there are some floor gaps right near the Monty Moles. Like the others, if you try to enter these, you get pushed to the side by the wall. So yeah, I just wanted to point those out. And now back to the real examples. Lastly, in the castle grounds, we have these 2 walls near the waterfall. So this one's like a 2-for-1 special, because this vertex misses by a bit, and this vertex also misses by a bit. So all along the seam of both of these walls, we have unit columns of out of bounds that leak through. So if you want to be like Yoshi and jump into the waterfall, you'll have to hope you miss these invisible walls. So that's the 5th cause of invisible walls, which we're going to call floor gap due to misaligned vertices. And with that, it means we've done the left side of the Punnett square, which focused on floor edges failing to line up. Next, we're going to do the right side, which focuses on a floor edge and a ceiling edge failing to line up. You might get some deja vu as I explain it, because we're going to be going through a similar process to what we did before, but everything will be a little different. So, let's look at the 6th cause. So consider a box, just a regular old box. On the top there's a floor, on the bottom there's a ceiling, and on the sides there are walls. Now we're going to look at it from above on the unit grid. This time, I'm going to draw the floor from the top of the box and the ceiling from the bottom of the box. Right now, the 2 rectangles exactly coincide, so it just looks purple. But I assure you, both a floor rectangle and a ceiling rectangle are being drawn. So this time, we're going to focus on the floor rectangle's south edge and the ceiling rectangle's south edge. Or in other words, the edge at the top of the wall versus the edge at the bottom of the wall. The question we're going to be analyzing is, do these 2 edges line up, or does one jut out more than the other? On the unit grid, we can see that these 2 edges have the same lateral coordinates, so they do line up. Now if we see any red area, then we know the ceiling is jutting out more. And if we see any blue area, then we know the floor is jutting out more. But if all we see is purple, then we know the floor edge and ceiling edge are exactly aligned. So let's put the structure back to a top-down view, and now let's rotate it. Still, the floor edge and the ceiling edge stay exactly in sync, so neither one juts out more. See, the 2 edges exactly match in terms of their lateral coordinates. So let's rotate the structure back to normal, and now we're gonna modify it. Now it's 2 steps going to the right. And you can see this change reflected on the unit grid, because now the floor is subdivided into 2 rectangles while the ceiling is still just 1 rectangle. And if you notice, the floor now has 2 edge vertices because these vertices are meant to lie exactly on the ceiling edges below. Now since the whole structure is cardinally aligned, it's easy for the edge vertices to lie exactly on their edges, and so no ceiling leaks through. On the 3D structure on the left, that means that this vertex exactly lines up with this edge. So let's clear all of that, put the structure back to a top-down view, and now let's rotate it again. You can see that now we run into the same issue from earlier because we have edge vertices at weird angles. For example, let's stop it here. At this angle, it's impossible for the edge vertex to lie in its edge, because the edge vertex has to be at integer coordinates, but the edge doesn't go through any integer coordinates. And so the edge vertex just has to pick integer coordinates that are close to the edge. In this case, the result is that the ceiling edge juts out a bit from the floor edge, because we can see some red area. Now if the edge vertex were here instead, then the floor would be jutting out because we can see some blue area. That would be fine, since it means the floor covers the entire ceiling and some extra. In fact, that's what's happening on the other side of the structure. But since the edge vertex is here, now we have an issue, because the ceiling juts out, which lets some ceiling leak through. To see this, we can do our little process. So first, we'll mark each integer point as either floor or ceiling. If it's both floor and ceiling, then I'm coloring it purple. Then add the arrows, and then fill in the unit squares. And so we can see that some of the unit squares are ceiling with no floor to cover them. Consequently, those ceiling units leak through the leaning wall and cause invisible walls. And so, any structure that resembles this structure could have the same problem. The floor could have the edge vertex, the ceiling could have the edge vertex, they could both have edge vertices. In fact, the structure could even look like this, or like this, or like this. Basically, it'll be a structure where on top there's a floor, on the bottom there's a ceiling, and on the side there are walls. Then you need the floor edges at the top of the wall and the ceiling edges at the bottom of the wall to be subdivided differently. That causes there to be edge vertices, which are intended to line up with an edge. But if the structure is at a weird angle, then the edge vertex might be misaligned from its edge, allowing some ceiling to leak through. So to recap, we looked at 4 scenarios: whether there was no edge vertex or there was an edge vertex, and whether the structure was cardinally aligned or at a weird angle. And only when there was an edge vertex at a weird angle did the ceiling jut out. So those are the 2 main ingredients. Now let's look at the situation from the side. So, consider the box again. Let's put it sideways and take the cross section of it. As we saw in the previous demonstration, there's some geometry that can cause these 2 points to be misaligned, meaning the wall triangle can end up slanted. So just like last time, we're going to look at 5 different alignments of the upper point. But this time, instead of checking whether 2 floors completely cover out of bounds, we're checking whether 1 floor completely covers a ceiling. So let's start with the wall being perfectly vertical. In this case, the edge of the floor is exactly flush with the edge of the ceiling. If we show the hitboxes, we can see that the floor completely covers the ceiling hitbox. And since none of the ceiling leaks through, it doesn't cause any invisible walls. So I'll give this case a happy face. Then next, let's look at leaning very far back. Here, the wall triangle is so slanted that it's now a ceiling. So that's an extra ceiling that the floor now needs to cover. But if we show the hitboxes, we can see that the floor does cover both ceilings completely. So this case gets a happy face. Then next, let's look at leaning a little back. Here, the wall triangle is still a wall, just a slightly leaning wall. If we show the hitboxes again, we can see that the floor still covers the whole ceiling, this time with a little bit of floor to spare. So this case gets a happy face. Then next, let's skip ahead and look at leaning very far forwards. Here, the wall triangle is so slanted the other way that it's now a floor. If we show the hitboxes, we can see that the 2 floors together cover all of the ceiling. Like, the original floor no longer covers the whole ceiling because its left edge is to the right of the ceiling's left edge. But fortunately, the new floor is there to pick up the slack and cover that part. So this case gets a happy face. And then finally, let's look at leaning a little forwards. Here, the wall triangle is still a wall, just a slightly leaning wall. Now let's show the hitboxes. You can see that in this case, some of the ceiling leaks through the leaning wall, because walls don't cover ceiling hitboxes. It's just like I said earlier, walls that lean slightly forwards are taking on the responsibility of a floor, but without the powers of a floor. So I'm gonna give this case an angry face. So to recap, we looked at 5 slants and only a wall that's leaning slightly forwards lets ceiling hitbox leak through. And if we move the upper vertex around continuously, you can see that it's only a very narrow range that lets the ceiling leak through. Specifically, the wall triangle has to be leaning forwards so that the ceiling juts out more than the floor, but the wall can't be leaning too far forwards or else it acts as a floor that covers that distance. And finally, let's look at the side view and the top-down view at the same time. When the wall leans very far back, the fill is just a uniform shade of purple, so no ceiling leaks. When the wall leans a little back, we see some blue, meaning the floor juts out more than the ceiling. But that doesn't cause any trouble. When the wall's perfectly vertical, it's also a uniform shade of purple, which is fine. When the wall leans a little forwards, now we see some red, meaning the ceiling juts out more than the floor, so some ceiling might be leaking through the leaning wall. And when the wall leans very far forwards, then the wall becomes a floor that covers the ceiling hitbox. So it's once again a uniform shade of purple, which is fine. And so, it's only the one case where ceiling leaks through. And let me clarify something. Last time, we looked at floor gaps, which actually had 3 different subcases. It could be a floor gap with a floor under it, a floor gap that lets out of bounds leak through, or a floor gap that lets ceiling leak through. But this time, there's just one case. When the ceiling juts out, ceiling leaks through. So I just wanted to clarify that bit of asymmetry. And so now, let's look at some examples. In Bob on Battlefield, we have this gray tunnel. Here's the wall, and you can see that the edges at the top and bottom of the wall are subdivided differently, which causes there to be edge vertices. So let's go to a top-down view, show the floors on the top of the tunnel, and you can see that on the underside of the tunnel, we have some ceilings. So let's add those to our map as well. Now we're gonna zoom in on each edge vertex. On all 4 of these edge vertices, you can see some red area, meaning the ceiling juts out more than the floor. And so the result is that all along this edge, there are ceiling units with no floor to cover them, resulting in an invisible wall. But we can't forget about the other side of the tunnel, because here we have something very similar going on. Another 4 edge vertices. But will the ceiling jut out or the floor jut out? Let's see. First the ceiling juts out, then the floor juts out, then the ceiling juts out, then the floor juts out. So interestingly, we actually end up with only 2 ceiling units of invisible wall, one at each of the 2 vertices where the ceiling jutted out. So that's a cool thing about this type of invisible wall. Sometimes there will just be a single unit column sticking out right at the ceiling vertex itself. And now I'll show you another cool thing you can do with invisible walls, walking in midair, then down warping. So how does that work? Well, let me explain. So as you know, Mario's movement consists of him moving using quarter steps. Now, the quarter step function in the code has a return value. You can basically think of the return value as the status for how the quarter step went. In total, there are 4 possible values that can be returned. First, the movement succeeded. This is basically the default value and means nothing unexpected happened. Second, Mario became airborne. This happens when you leave the ground. Third, the movement got cancelled, either because Mario moved into a ceiling or out of bounds. And fourth, Mario hit a wall, which happens when Mario hits a wall. Now the quarter step function can only return one of these values, so even if it seems like multiple things happened, the function just has to pick one and return it. So for example, let's say we have a setup like this and Mario does a quarter step. This quarter step both leaves the ground and moves into a ceiling that cancels the step. The function can't return both that Mario became airborne and the movement got cancelled, so it just has to pick one. And in this case, it picks that the movement got cancelled. That one takes priority. So what happens here is that the movement gets cancelled and Mario ends up pushing in place. He does not become airborne. Here's what that looks like in the game. Mario's movement gets cancelled even though the quarter step goes off the edge. But now consider this. Let's say Mario's walking into a ceiling and then suddenly the floor moves out from under him. You'd think he would fall down, but that's not what happens. He's actually able to stay in the air walking into the ceiling. See, the normal way that the game realizes that Mario is airborne is by checking the return value of the quarter step function and seeing if it's the airborne option. But as we just established, if Mario walks into a ceiling and the air at the same time, then the quarter step function just returns that the movement got cancelled, not that Mario became airborne. So at no point does the game realize that Mario should become airborne, and instead he's just allowed to continue moving into the ceiling in midair. An easy place to see this is on this elevator in Big Boo's Haunt. We can walk into the ceiling next to the elevator, and then Mario stays in place pushing even as the elevator moves away. Now when you're in this state, there are a few things you can do. You can press A to jump out of it, you can press B to punch in place, and you can press Z, which downwarps you to the ground while crouching. Why does it downwarp you? Well, when you press Z while you're moving, you go into the crouch sliding action. Now, an interesting thing about the sliding actions is that they tilt Mario based on the floors around him. See, even though Mario's on a flat floor, the sliding action causes him to tilt based on that hill next to him. Here's the function in the code responsible for setting that tilt, but you can see that the first thing this function does is set Mario's height to be at the height of the floor below him. So that means every time you slide and get your tilt set, you're also being snapped to the floor below you. More specifically, this floor snap happens on every frame except if your last quarter step became airborne. You know, because they didn't want you to get a big downwarp when you slide off the edge. So let's say you're in midair and you're walking into a ceiling. Then you press Z to crouch slide into the ceiling. The first quarter step of the crouch slide enters the ceiling hitbox and gets cancelled. So the return value of that quarter step is that it got cancelled, not that it became airborne. And like I said, any sliding movement that doesn't become airborne aligns Mario with the ground, and so he gets a big downwarp to the floor below him. So that's how the downwarp works in Big Boo's Haunt. So this mostly explains how I downwarped earlier. I walked into a ceiling in midair and then pressed Z. But how did I initiate walking in midair without standing on a platform that moves out from under me? Well, it has to do with the turning around action. See, when Mario starts turning around, he goes into the turning around action. Then a bit later, it transitions into the walking action. You know, because he finished turning around. Here's the code for the turning around action, and here's the relevant logic. So if Mario's done turning around, specifically if the turning around animation is completed, then Mario goes into the walking action. Now a bit earlier, we have some other important code. This one says, if the quarter steps result in becoming airborne, then Mario goes into the free fall action. So you can see the issue. Let's say on the same frame, Mario both leaves the ground and finishes turning around. Then first his action gets set to free fall, and then second his action gets set to walking. So that first action change gets overridden by the second action change. And so even though Mario left the ground, he still ends up in the walking action. Now this exploit by itself just results in one frame of walking in the air before transitioning to free fall on the next frame. But let's say we use that one frame of walking in the air to walk into out of bounds. Now Mario stays walking in midair and can downwarp by pressing Z. We can also use that one frame of walking in the air to walk into a ceiling, which also lets us downwarp. Now since invisible walls are made of out of bounds and ceilings, we can also do the trick on them, by walking in midair and then pressing Z to downwarp. So let me summarize everything. I did a turnaround and then walked off the edge on the same frame that the turnaround ended. That first set my action to freefall, but then overrode it with the walking action. So I was in midair, but still in the walking action. Then I walked into the invisible wall, so the quarter step return value was that the quarter step got cancelled, not that I left the ground. Because of that, the game didn't know that I should have become airborne, and so it just let me walk in midair. And finally, I pressed Z to downwarp because the crouch sliding action aligns Mario with his floor if it doesn't become airborne. And here, it didn't become airborne, it got cancelled because I crouch slid into the invisible wall. So a lot going on there, but that's how you can downwarp on basically any invisible wall. Then still in Bob-omb Battlefield, we have this wall on the mountain. This is the wall with the lower alcove. Now, there's one triangle on the wall that's actually classified as a ceiling. So, let's mark that ceiling's edges as well. So that gives us 4 edge vertices. And as you can see, all 4 of them have the ceiling jut out more than the floor. So that means both on the ceiling of the alcove and along that little extra ceiling, we have ceiling columns leaking through. Luckily, none of them block the entrance of the alcove itself. But if you're on top of the mountain, you could hit this invisible wall if you try to cross above this edge. Then right above that previous wall, we have this wall on the mountain. This is the wall with the upper alcove, which if you remember, already had an invisible wall in it. But anyway, we have 4 edge vertices on the ceiling of the alcove. So let's see. Floor juts out, ceiling juts out, ceiling juts out. So basically, just on the right side of the alcove ceiling, we have some ceiling columns leaking through. So you could hit these if you try to travel above the alcove. Now, speedrunners actually come out of that upper alcove and side flip up to King Bob-omb, potentially going right through the invisible wall. So if you ever try that side flip and you only manage to ledge grab, you probably got blocked by that invisible wall. Then in Jolly Roger Bay, we have this wall on the sunken ship. The wall is a diamond shape, so it has 2 edge vertices, one at the top corner and one at the bottom corner. You can see that both edge vertices let the ceiling jut out, and it juts out by a lot. So once again, we have a really thick invisible wall. Now this is our first invisible wall that stems from surface triangles on an object, because the sunken ship is an object and not just static geometry. And the thing about objects is that they're only tangible when Mario's within a certain radius around them. For example, if you're standing on an object and you jump up too high, you may notice your shadow change positions. That's because when you jump up too high, you move out of the object's tangibility radius, and so the object stops being tangible. In other words, the object stops loading its surface triangles, and so your shadow drops from on top of the object to just on top of the ground. So let's go back to the sunken ship. The invisible walls here stem from the ship's ceiling triangles. In other words, these invisible walls only exist when the ship's surface triangles are loaded, and that only happens when Mario is within this radius around the ship. So if Mario's outside of that radius, the ship won't have any surface triangles, and so effectively, there are no invisible walls outside of the radius. And so going forward, all invisible walls stemming from object triangles will have their height capped at the object's tangibility radius. So here, you can see that if we swim above the invisible wall, nothing happens, since the ship is intangible when we're this far away from it. But if we swim a little lower down into the invisible wall, then the ceiling triangles are loaded and affect Mario, causing him to downwarp. Because remember, when you're in water, ceiling hitboxes downwarp you to the bottom of their hitbox.
What the what? What just happened? What just happened?
Then in Cool Mountain, we have this wall on the side of this snowy bridge. It's just a triangle, so it has one edge vertex on the bottom. If we zoom in, you can see that the ceiling juts out, meaning we have ceiling columns all along this edge. And I really like the way this one looks, it's very aesthetically pleasing. But anyway, if you're sliding down this path, be wary of jumping off to the right side here. Then still in Cool Mountain, we have this wall near the wall kicks will work area. It has one edge vertex on the top, and when we zoom in, you can see that the ceiling juts out. So we have a decently thick invisible wall, which thins out farther away from the ledge. Now you might think, who would ever run into this invisible wall? Like, you're not just gonna jump off the edge right there, right? Well, not exactly. You see, speedrunners jump down that way to get to the wall kicks will work star. So let's take a look at some past attempts.
Oh my god, that's... What? How am I standing here? Oh. Mario?
What the fuck? Oh my...
So what's going on with those? Mario's doing some weird animations. Well, let me explain. Firstly, when Mario's on a steep floor, he slides down. You can even slide into ceilings and out of bounds, in which case your movement gets cancelled and you just stay sliding in place. And note that when you're sliding, you can use the control stick to tilt Mario's upper body. Now usually when you're in a sliding action, your animation updates every frame to be the sliding animation. But there's an oversight in the sliding code, because if you're sliding and your movement gets cancelled, either from moving into a ceiling or out of bounds, then Mario's animation doesn't get set to the sliding animation. Instead, you just keep whatever animation you are already in. I mean here, I was already in the sliding animation when I started sliding into out of bounds, so I kept that sliding animation. But let me demonstrate it with a different animation. Here, I do the pushing animation and then start sliding into out of bounds. The sliding into out of bounds doesn't update Mario's animation, and so his animation stays as pushing, even though he's actually sliding. And when you're in this state, you can still use the control stick to tilt Mario's upper body. So going back to Cool Mountain, you can see that the invisible wall here is right next to a steep floor that makes you slide. So we can use the invisible wall to let us slide in place with various other animations. For example, here I slide in place in the backflipping animation. So it doesn't even look like Mario landed yet, even though he's actually on the ground sliding. Here I slide in the jumping animation, and remember, I can still tilt Mario's upper body, which looks pretty funny in this animation. It definitely wasn't intended to handle that. Here I slide in the walking animation. This one also looks pretty silly when you tilt him, especially because he's just running in place. Where are you trying to get to, Mario? You trying to go somewhere? Oh, almost got there. Come on, Mario, you can do it. Oh, almost there. Come on, a little more. Oh, there we go. Here I do a triple jump into it, so I slide in the triple jump animation. And here I slide in the sparkly triple jump animation, which results in Mario somersaulting for forever. So yeah, it's fun to play around with. Then in Hazy Maze Cave, we have this wall on this little floating structure. It has 2 edge vertices on the bottom. So will the floor jut out or the ceiling jut out? On this first vertex, actually neither one juts out. They're exactly aligned. So give it up for the programmers, guys. They made an edge vertex that exactly lies on its edge. No one thought it could be done, but here we are. Well, to be fair, this edge is at a 45-degree angle, so not exactly a weird angle. And then for the other edge vertex, the ceiling juts out. So actually, that results in just one ceiling column of invisible wall, right at the vertex itself. But then there's also the other side of the structure, which is like a mirror image of the first side. So we have 2 edge vertices, one of them lines up exactly, and the other one lets the ceiling jut out. So on this side too, we have another ceiling column all by itself. So I actually don't know if anyone's ever hit these ones before, given how little area they cover. Then in Lethal Lava Land, we have this wall at the start of the walkway. There's 1 edge vertex at the bottom. Now the edge vertex misses its edge, but it's interesting, because to the left, this causes a floor gap with out of bounds units, and to the right, this causes the ceiling to jut out with ceiling units. So it's once again a hybrid invisible wall, with some out of bounds and some ceiling. So be careful when you jump onto the start of this path, because you will get burned if you mess up. Then in Snowman's Land, we have this wall on the ledge with the tree. It has 1 edge vertex on the bottom. Now this one's also a hybrid in a sense, because on the left we have a floor gap with ceiling leaking through, and on the right we have the ceiling jutting out more than the floor does. So that means all along this edge there are ceiling columns leaking through. So if you're ever climbing up the snowman and then you randomly have your height cut short or bonk while you're crossing this edge, now you know why. Then still in Snowman's Land, we have this section near the top of the snowman. This one's a little weird because it doesn't involve a wall. Instead, to the left we have a ceiling, so let's mark the ceiling's edge, and to the right we have a floor, so let's mark the floor's edge. And so basically, the edge vertex is here because the floor vertex is meant to lie on the ceiling's edge. Now the edge vertex misses, which means that farther to the right, we have the ceiling jutting out more than the floor. And so all along this edge, we have some invisible wall from the ceiling leaking through. This one could get in your way if you try cutting across the corner while climbing the snowman. But also, this invisible wall is next to a floor so steep that you can't stand on it or slide on it. You just fall off of it. So a cool thing you can do is wedge Mario between the floor and the invisible wall, and he just kind of gets stuck there in the falling animation. But it is possible to get out of it.
Yes, no!
What is going on? What?
I've never seen that. What?
Then in Tall Tall Mountain, we have this wall near the rolling log. See, there's a reason I picked this place to use for the intro, and it's because there's so many invisible walls around here that I figured the most people would relate to bumping into one of them. Then we also have one on this wall, which includes that part on the left without a wall. We actually have 2 different edge vertices here, which both miss the edge. So that means to the left, we have some invisible wall from the ceiling jutting out. And then on the other side of the log, we also have something going on. 2 edge vertices. The right edge vertex lets the floor jut out, which is okay, but the left edge vertex misses in a way that both makes a floor gap with ceiling units and also lets the ceiling jut out. So yet another hybrid case. So yeah, this area is even more hazardous than you would think, with 3 more invisible walls that you have to worry about. And there's actually 1 more invisible wall that's around here, but we're not gonna get around to that one until a bit later, so stay tuned for that.
Abandon the casino. What the fuck was that? I'm pretty sure that was an invis wall.
What? Oh my god.
Then still in Tall Tall Mountain, at the top of the waterfall, we have these 2 walls. It's another alcove, and alcoves seem to be basically as bad as stairs are. But anyway, we have 2 edge vertices, and they both let the ceiling jut out. So along both ceiling edges, we have some invisible wall. Though it's much more concentrated on the left side than it is on the right side. So basically, if you try to enter the alcove from above, you might get blocked by this invisible wall. Then in the Tall Mountain slide, we have the first arch. Remember when I said the first arch was fine because it had a floor on top, unlike the second and third arches? Well, turns out it does have some invisible walls. We just weren't ready for them back then. But you can see that its shape creates a ton of edge vertices, so it's almost guaranteed that some of them will let ceiling leak out. And then there's also the other side of the arch. There's not actually a wall on this side, but I'm still drawing a theoretical wall just to help you see the shape of the arch. So on this side too, we have a bunch of edge vertices, some of which let ceiling leak through. And the invisible wall on this side is basically a mirror image of the invisible wall on the other side. So while you can go on top of the first arch, unlike the second and third arches, there are still some invisible walls to worry about. Then in the huge version of Tiny Huge Islands, we have this wall, one edge vertex at the bottom, which lets ceiling jut out, so we have some invisible wall to the right of the edge vertex. But we're actually not done yet, because on this wall too, we have something going on. Two more edge vertices that both let ceiling jut out, so we have some invisible wall on this edge too. So I guess if you ever wanted to just jump off one of these two edges, then these invisible walls could get in your way. Or just think of them as guardrails keeping you on for your own safety. And then in the tiny version of Tiny Huge Island, we have basically the same thing. Well, only for the first invisible wall. The second invisible wall actually isn't present at all here. But for this one, it's just one more invisible wall that you have to worry about. Then in Tick-Tock Clock, we have this wall on, you guessed it, more stairs. So that's 3 edge vertices, the outer 2 line up exactly, but the middle one lets the ceiling jut out. So just near that middle vertex, we have some invisible wall, specifically on the first and second steps. But then we also have the other side of the stairs. Note that the wall on this side doesn't include the upper 2 steps, because the wall for those 2 steps is a bit further out in order to be flush with the treadmill. But that means we just have 2 edge vertices, one of them lines up exactly, and the other one lets the ceiling jut out. So on this side of the stairs, we have some invisible wall just on the first step. And so these invisible walls are pretty bad, because they might kill you on the very first jump in the level, only a couple seconds in.
For the one time, Mario, don't die.
Walls absolutely everywhere. Like, literally, go f yourself.
And since Tick-Tock Clock is a vertical stage, that means invisible walls here have a much greater impact, because now the invisible wall can affect you at later parts of the level too. This invisible wall goes all the way up until it meets this walkway. But more importantly, it's right in the middle of this gap you have to jump over, where sometimes it gets cut off a bit by this rotating triangle. But that means anytime you jump over this gap, you have to worry about this invisible wall. And bonking in Tick-Tock Clock usually leads to falling way far down, often with dire consequences. So it's pretty unfortunate for speedrunners, but that's just the way it is.
Oh, my cock, dude.
And speedrunners will also try to jump from this cog to the get a hand star, which goes right through this invisible wall. So you could easily bonk during that jump too.
Alright, so I can do it here and there's no invisible.
What? What? Okay. I don't have any words for that invisible wall. I've never seen that invisible wall.
Oh my god, invis wall? Really? Oh my god, another invis wall!
Then in that same area, we have this wall on the treadmill. Because of the way the floor slopes down on both sides, we get 2 edge vertices. The left one has the floor jut out, and the right one has the ceiling jut out. So primarily on the right side, we get some invisible walls. But not above the last 2 stairs, because they connect to the treadmill and block the invisible wall from coming out. Now luckily, this invisible wall doesn't extend up too high since it's from an object, but it can still lead to your death if you hit it just right. Then still in Tick-Tock Clock, we have this wall on the Pit and the Pendulums area. Kind of a weird shape, but it has 3 edge vertices. So let's see. First the ceiling juts out, then they're exactly aligned, then the ceiling juts out. Consequently, we have ceiling columns all along the edge. Though you may notice that there's a single gap in the invisible wall, which is right at the vertex that was exactly aligned. But basically, that means that anytime you jump over to this area, you risk bonking and falling all the way down to your death. So definitely not a very fair system.
Why is there an invisible wall there?
Hey, now you know why. Now this invisible wall also extends pretty high up in the level. You can see some of it stops at this walkway, but then the rest of it rises up all the way to the ceiling of the course. So yeah, this one can be pretty annoying given how far reaching it is in the level. Specifically, it passes by 2 walkways. For this lower walkway, if you try to take a shortcut by jumping across the gap, you may bonk and fall down to your death.
That is the saddest thing since sliced bread. Dude!
Clearly, this is not the run. Clearly, Jesus.
And for the upper walkway, if you try to jump down, as speedrunners do, you could definitely hit the invisible wall.
I'll be back.
Oula, je vais juste aller sur l'aiguille histoire d'éviter les murs invisibles. Waouh!
Someone help me, man. Jesus fucking Christ.
But this one actually has a solution. See, you can go forwards on top of the clock hand because it creates a little safe haven above it. It's like Moses parting the Red Sea, but it's the clock hand parting the invisible wall. Then even still in Tick-Tock Clock, we have these 3 treadmills. Now the treadmills themselves are cardinally aligned, so there's no issue with them. But focus your attention on these mesh walls between the treadmills. These walls are actually both sides of 2 little boxes. So if we look at them, you can see that they're 3D shapes. It's just that normally you only see the texture for one side of them. Now on the bottom of these boxes, we have ceilings. So the question is, do the ceiling hitboxes leak out? Well, you see, the boxes don't have floors on their tops. Instead, they rely solely on the treadmill floors to cover them. So let's see how well that plays out. For this first seam, there's a 1 unit wide gap between the treadmills. Consequently, we see some red area, so you might think some ceiling leaks through. But actually, every integer coordinate is covered by a floor, so all the ceiling is covered. Now let's take a look at the other seam. Between these 2 treadmills, there's a 2 unit wide gap. So this time, we do have integer coordinates that are ceiling with no floor to cover them. This gives us a 1 unit thick continuous seam of invisible wall between those 2 treadmills. And so as you're climbing from the 2nd treadmill to the 3rd treadmill, you might hit this invisible wall. But that's not actually the full story here. Remember what I said, the boxes have ceilings on the bottom, but no floors on the top, so they rely on the treadmill floors to cover the ceilings. But the treadmills are objects, meaning that they're only tangible when Mario's near them. So it probably wasn't a very good idea to cover the ceilings with floors that are only sometimes there. I'll illustrate what I mean with a diagram. So here are the 3 treadmills, here's the upper box, and here's the lower box. Now we're actually going to subdivide both boxes into 2 chunks. So both boxes have a right chunk and a left chunk. Next, let's add the ceilings on the bottom of the boxes. Now we're going to go through the 4 chunks to see what each of their ceiling hitboxes look like. So first let's do the right chunk of the lower box. In isolation, its ceiling hitbox looks like this, but this chunk is covered by the lower treadmill. So if Mario's within this radius around the treadmill, then the treadmill will have its floors to cover the ceiling, so there's no invisible wall within that radius. But the invisible wall is there when Mario's outside of the radius. Then next, let's look at the left chunk of the lower box. In isolation, its ceiling hitbox looks like this, but this chunk is covered by the middle treadmill. So if Mario's within this radius, then the treadmill has its floors, and so there's no invisible wall within that radius, but it is there outside of the radius. Then next, let's look at the right chunk of the upper box. This one's not covered by any treadmill, so the full ceiling hitbox is exposed. And finally, let's look at the left chunk of the upper box. In isolation, its ceiling hitbox looks like this, but this chunk is covered by the upper treadmill. So if Mario's within this radius, then the treadmill has its floors, and so there's no invisible wall within that radius, but it is there outside of the radius. And so now you can see the true nature of these invisible walls. Specifically, we have 4 separate chunks of invisible wall. One of them is fully exposed, and the other 3 exist only outside of the tangibility radius of the corresponding treadmill. Now I'll show what these invisible walls look like in the game. So we have the right chunk of the lower box, the left chunk of the lower box, the right chunk of the upper box, and the left chunk of the upper box. So yeah, this is the true nature of these invisible walls. So you can see that the lower invisible walls rise up into the walkway, while the upper invisible walls rise up all the way to the ceiling of the course. So even between the first and second treadmill, there's still the possibility of bonking if you jump up high enough. And because the upper invisible wall rises all the way to the top, it can get in your way if you try to long jump from the clock hand over to the thwomp. And remember, it's not just a single seam of invisible wall, it's a whole box area's worth. So there's really no chance of you getting lucky and passing right through it, like you could with many of the other invisible walls. And then one more in Tick-Tock Clock, we have this wall on the uppermost treadmill. Just like the first treadmill, it has 2 edge vertices on the top. When we zoom in, you can see that the right one lets the ceiling jut out, and the left one is exactly aligned. So just on this side of the treadmill, we have some invisible wall. And remember, because these invisible wall units stem from an object, I cap their height at the object's tangibility radius. And so even at the very top of Tick-Tock Clock, there's this final invisible wall to worry about. Then in Rainbow Ride, we're back to the ship. We have this wall on the ship's outside, which has 1 edge vertex on the bottom. Zooming in, you can see that the edge vertex misses by 2 units even though the edge was cardinally aligned. So the invisible wall is 2 units thick right at the edge vertex, and everywhere else it's a 1 unit thick continuous seam. And so if you try long jumping onto that part of the ship, this invisible wall could lead to your death. Then in Vanish Cap Under the Moat, on the uppermost platform, we have this wall. It has 1 edge vertex on the bottom. Now this one's another hybrid, because to the right, we have the ceiling jut out more than the floor, and to the left, we have a floor gap that lets out of bounds leak through. So we end up with some out of bounds and some ceiling, both stemming from the same misaligned edge vertex. But then we have something similar going on the second platform. And by similar, I mean exactly the same thing, because this edge vertex also causes a hybrid invisible wall, with some out of bounds and some ceiling. But we're not done yet, because the third platform also has a hybrid invisible wall, but this time on the other side of the platform. So you might be wondering just how many of these platforms are going to have invisible walls. Well, we're on the 4th platform right now, and there are only 7 platforms total, so why don't you take a guess at how many of them have invisible walls? Right now we're seeing the 5th platform's invisible wall, and the 6th platform also has an invisible wall. So we're 6 for 6, place your bets for the last one. And the 7th platform also has an invisible wall, this time on the other side again. Can you believe that? That means all 7 platforms have invisible walls on them. Look at that. Look at what you have to go through every time you traverse this area. A whole gauntlet of invisible walls. So you thought the challenge was just to make your way down some platforms while collecting the red coins. But nope, there's an additional secret challenge, which is to hope you get lucky on every platform's invisible wall. And speedrunners will do a triple jump on the 7th platform in order to get onto the railing, which goes right through that last invisible wall.
I got invis-walled.
Oh, no. What?
What the? Okay. What?
Temporary invisible wall.
Oh, okay. Yeah, alright. Moving right along.
And then finally, we have this wall in the castle foyer. Factoring in the hole for the door, it has 3 edge vertices. Zooming in, we have exactly aligned, and ceiling juts out. So that means mainly on the right side of the door opening, we have ceiling leaking through. So you might just be going through the foyer to your next course, and then bam, you hit this invisible wall. So not even the foyer is safe. So that's the 6th cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call ceiling juts out due to misaligned edge vertex. And so now, let's look at the 7th cause. So remember that structure we had before, where it was just a regular old box? Let's look at it from above again. Remember, when this structure rotated, the floor edge and ceiling edge stayed perfectly flush without letting any ceiling leak through. But now focus your attention on this vertex of the ceiling. If we move this vertex to a slightly different spot, then it can make the ceiling jut out. And if we do our little process, we can see that some units are ceiling with no floor to cover them. And so those ceiling units leak through the leaning wall and cause invisible walls. So once again, there are cases where the programmers literally just didn't line up 2 vertices that could have been lined up. In this case, it's a floor vertex and a ceiling vertex that aren't lined up, allowing some ceiling to leak through. So let's look at some examples. In Bob on Battlefield, we have these 2 walls on the mountain, on the ridge with the spinning heart. Based on their edges, they connect at this vertex. So will the floor vertex and ceiling vertex line up? Nope. The ceiling vertex misses by 1 unit and causes ceiling to jut out on both walls. So we end up with invisible wall on both of these edges. So this is just one more invisible wall on the mountain that you have to worry about. Then in Whomp's Fortress, we have this wall on the axle connected to the rotating elevators. Note that the axle is shaped like a triangular prism. We can see that the floor vertex and ceiling vertex are 1 unit off, so the ceiling juts out on this edge. Though, it only results in 3 units of ceiling leaking through. But nevertheless, it's still a potential thing that can make you bonk out of nowhere as you play this level. Then in Cool Mountain, we have this wall in the wall kicks will work area. This time, the floor vertex and ceiling vertex miss by quite a bit, and so all along this wall, we end up with ceiling units leaking through. And so this is the 2nd invisible wall that we've seen near the wall kicks will work area. And remember, speedrunners go through that spot as they make their way to the star, so it's extra bad for speedrunners.
What was that? Did you see that? The invisible wall? Wow! I never seen this. Wow.
Then in Snowman's Land, we have this wall on the snowman. And let's also mark this floor edge next to it, because that also connects to the vertex we're about to look at. Zooming in, you can see that the floor vertex misses the ceiling vertex by 1 unit. So on the left, we have a floor gap with ceiling coming out, and on the right, we have the ceiling jutting out more than the floor. So another hybrid case. And earlier, we had another invisible wall right around here. So I guess this part of the snowman wasn't put together too well. Then in Tall Mountain, on the mushroom near the start, we have these 4 walls. Based on their edges, that gives us 5 vertices to examine. So let's see. Floor juts out, ceiling juts out, exactly aligned, ceiling juts out, and both floor and ceiling jut out in different directions. That means along all 4 of these edges on the mushroom, the ceiling juts out and causes invisible walls. So anytime you jump onto the starting mushroom, you might bonk and die. Though on the bright side, you don't actually need to go onto that mushroom for anything. But what if it affected a mushroom that was a lot more important, like the lonely mushroom? Because on this mushroom too, we also have 4 relevant walls. When we look at these vertices, we see something very similar, with the vertices missing each other. That gives us invisible walls along these 4 edges too. And this one's even worse, because this is a mushroom that you have to go to, and so you might bonk out of nowhere and die as you're trying to get the star on it. But we're not done yet, because there's one more mushroom we have to do, and that's the mushroom with the red coin star on it. You know, I'm starting to suspect that they just copy and pasted these mushrooms, which would explain why all 3 of them have such similar mistakes in terms of not lining up their vertices quite right. But yeah, that means that this mushroom also has 4 edges worth of invisible wall, so you could easily hit this and die as you're jumping to the red coin star. And don't count on the wind to save you.
What? No! What the? What the? Nah! What? What do you? What? What the fuck? What do you want me to do? What? Nah! No! I refuse to believe that. Just come on. You look like the NPC version of Mark Ruffalo. Just get what is going on? What is going on? So anyway, how are you guys doing today? Pretty good, or you know, how's work? How's school?
And just the other day, Liam was on a world record pace run and lost a run to this invisible wall.
Rounds up to fucking 13.
Mulch coded.
I don't deserve it. Why does this only happen to me? Why do I only get the worst invis walls in all of my runs? Why do I consistently get the worst coin RNG, the worst luck at all, in every run? Keep going? Dude, I'm gonna die. I was like playing fine, man. Like I was playing fine. I would have saved time, man. Oh my god, man.
So to avoid hitting this invisible wall during a speedrun, you just have to aim more to the right. Specifically, make sure you cross onto the mushroom to the right of this vertex that I'm highlighting here. If you do that, then you will avoid the invisible wall. Then in Tower of the Wingcap, we have this wall on the side of the rook. This wall has 2 edge vertices, but we're also going to look at this vertex on the far left. So let's see what we got. Ceiling juts out, floor juts out, and then this vertex misses by 2 units, causing the ceiling to jut out. So all along this edge, we end up with invisible wall from the ceiling leaking out. But we're not done yet, because we also have to look at this wall on the rook. Once again, we have 2 edge vertices and another vertex to look at. This time, we have ceiling juts out, floor juts out, and this vertex misses by 2 units. So it's the exact same thing on this side, which makes me wonder if this was copy and pasted too. And we're still not done because we have one more thing to look at, and I literally mean one more. Because on this vertex, if we zoom in, you can see that the floor vertex misses the ceiling vertex, and it results in just 1 unit of ceiling leaking out. So in total, we have 2 edges of invisible wall, which are symmetric to each other, and a separate single unit of invisible wall in a different corner. But it's not jumping into these invisible walls that you should be worried about, but flying into them. Because remember what I said, flying into an invisible wall redirects you downwards. So you might be trying to fly onto the rook and then mysteriously get redirected downwards, bonk, and fall down.
Alright, down. This has to be aggressive. Okay, so somebody explain, when you land on something, why aren't you sliding?
Then in Bowser in the Fire Sea, we have some stuff going on this springy staircase. So for this ramp, if we take a look at the floor on top of the ramp and the ceiling on the bottom of the ramp, we can see that they're offset by about 20 units. So basically, the floor is in the right position, but the whole ceiling is just 20 units to the side of where it should be, which results in some invisible wall. And then actually, we have something very similar going on this ramp. Because if we look at the floor and ceiling here, we can see that the ceiling is also about 20 units off of where it should be. And right in this spot, that causes a huge chunk of ceiling to leak out, like a whole rectangle's worth. And then there's also invisible wall along the rest of the edge. And you can see that some of the unit columns rise up into the walkway above. Also, the bottom of these unit columns move up and down because the whole staircase moves up and down. So as you're climbing your way up this staircase, just be wary of bumping into those invisible walls.
What the fuck was that, dude? Holy shit.
But there's also a cool thing you can do with these invisible walls. We can walk into them and then the staircase moves away, resulting in Mario walking in midair. Like we discussed earlier, this is because every quarter step returns that it got cancelled instead of that it went airborne. So the game never realizes that Mario left the ground and just lets him walk in midair. Let's watch as one speedrunner discovers this trick all on their own.
The worst down angle anyone has. What the hell? I didn't know you could do this. What? What? What is that? What? What is happening? What is happening? Dude, I did not know. What the fuck?
Then still in Bowser in the Fire Sea, we have this wall on the walkway, and we're gonna focus on this vertex. When we zoom in, you can see that the floor vertex misses the ceiling vertex by 1 unit, and so along this edge, we get a 1 unit thick continuous seam of invisible wall from the ceiling leaking out. So this one's not actually too bad, because you're never really gonna jump off the edge right there. And then in Bowser in the Sky, we have something remarkably similar. Another wall on the corner of a walkway where there's a fire spitter nearby. And this floor vertex misses the ceiling vertex in exactly the same way as the previous one did, making me think that this may have been copy and pasted too. And so we end up with a very similar invisible wall. Note that this invisible wall only rises upwards until it meets the Goomba platform, so luckily you don't have to worry about it affecting you up there. But if you were to jump off the edge right here, then you'd have to worry about it. So to reiterate, this type of invisible wall happens when a floor vertex and a ceiling vertex are meant to be aligned, but they're slightly misaligned, which lets some ceiling leak through the leaning wall. Now earlier, I said these cases happen due to the programmers failing to line up the vertices. But this type of invisible wall can also happen even if the programmers lined up the vertices perfectly. Specifically, it can happen if the structure is an object that rotates. See, if it's rotating like this, then it's basically guaranteed that the structure will go through certain angles that cause there to be slightly leaning walls, and so those walls can let ceiling leak through. So that's why the front and back of the structure would let ceiling leak through due to misaligned vertices. But interestingly, even the sides of the structure can let ceiling leak through because these vertices can have slight fluctuations to the left and right, which creates a leaning wall that lets ceiling leak through. Though note that these side ones would actually be classified as the previous cause of invisible walls, which was ceiling jutting out due to misaligned edge vertex. And even if the structure is rotating perfectly sideways, that can still cause invisible walls, because now we have edge vertices at weird angles. So let's look at some examples. The rolling log has some invisible walls. You can see that the short sides of the log basically always have some invisible walls on them, and the long sides of the log have invisible walls only at certain angles. And this was the one I was referring to earlier, about how there was another invisible wall in this area. And as luck would have it, the angle that the log starts at has an invisible wall on the long side of it. So before you do anything, there's already an invisible wall there ready to get you when you jump onto the log. So let me just recap all the invisible walls in this area. On the left side, we have the inner seam, the outer edge, and the smaller edge. Then on the right side, we have this edge, and then for the rolling log, it starts off with this invisible wall. So a regular journey through here could go through 4 different invisible walls. 2 on the starting side, 1 on the rolling log, and 1 on the far side. So this is just not a very friendly area. The swings in Rainbow Ride have some invisible walls. Specifically, both the blue rectangle part on the bottom and the yellow axle part on the top create invisible walls at certain angles. You probably won't run into the one on the yellow axle anytime soon, but the one on the blue rectangle can get in your way as you make your way across the swing.
What?
The crusher in the volcano has an invisible wall on just 1 frame, specifically on the first frame when it starts retracting back into the wall. So you could hit this one if you try jumping over the crusher while it's out. The rotating bridge in Whomp's Fortress has invisible walls at many different angles, though note that the invisible walls only come out of the very tip end of the bridge. That's because its cross-section is an upside-down triangle, which causes there to be an edge vertex at many different weird angles. And bonking on this one is usually pretty bad, because then you fall down the ramp.
What? Hello? Dude.
No, the blue coin. What was that invisible, dude? Are you shitting me, man?
What?
The spinning triangle in Tick-Tock Clock has some invisible walls, but just on the front side. You wouldn't think there'd be any there, but the floors on the top are subdivided midway through the edge, which is what gives it an edge vertex. So we already talked about how this gap has invisible walls in it, but even the triangle has invisible walls on it, which could easily mess you up and cause you to fall all the way down. Rotating elevators have invisible walls when they rotate around at the top of their movement, so if you thought it was annoying how they rotate around, now you know that it's even more annoying, because those rotations produce invisible walls. The rotating cubes in Tick-Tock Clock have invisible walls when they rotate around, so you could hit one of those ones and fall down to your death, The rotating triangles in Tick-Tock Clock also have invisible walls, both when they're rotating and at certain stationary angles, so these ones could also trip you up and make you fall down. The elevators that are on fixed tracks have invisible walls, since they tilt as they go around their pathing. Look at how many there are. This elevator was supposed to help us get around, not inhibit us from getting around by blocking us with invisible walls. Now for the most part, I'm just showing one instance of each object, because it's just not feasible to show every instance of an object in every position at every angle. But for these fixed track elevators, I'm making an exception. See, since they do the same movement every time, their invisible walls are the same every time. So it just feels more worth it to show each of the 3 fixed track elevators in their entirety. Think of it like a carnival ride. Not that rigged carnival game from earlier, but like a nice peaceful ride where you're sitting in the boat, nice and safe, and it's passing by the scary pirates or something. But in this case, you're riding on the elevator with me as we're watching all the invisible walls. So relax, take a breather. You earned it for getting this far into the video. We can just have a friendly conversation, me and you. Me, who's recording these voice lines months in advance, and you, who can't actually talk back. That'll work, right? So I hope you're enjoying the video so far. This is literally the video that's taken the most effort of any video I've ever made. So I hope you find it worth the effort. And don't worry, I'm not gonna disappear for forever after this video. I have a lot more video ideas that I wanna make. I got regular video ideas, YouTube short ideas, music video ideas. So if you wanna see all those, make sure to subscribe. And our elevator ride is almost over, so let me commemorate this occasion with a little poem. Before Here and Now, I was all on my own. Then you came around and I found my new home. A place for just us to talk about it all, and as an added plus, some invisible walls. So if you want my view, all joking aside, I love being with you on this elevator ride.
Oh my...
Oh.
And now, let me show you something cool you can do on these elevators. A down warp that can happen when you bonk. I know we already had one down warp, but this one works a little differently, so let me explain it. So here's the frame before Mario down warps. So let's go to a top-down view, show the floors, show the ceilings, and now zoom in. You can see that currently the floor juts out a bit, so in the unit square view, it's mostly purple but with some blue squares. Now let's walk through what happens on this frame. First, the elevator moves one frame forwards, which slightly changes its triangles. So now the ceiling is jutting out more, giving us some red squares. Then Mario moves forwards, not because of his quarter step movement, but because he's on a moving platform. See, when Mario's on a moving platform, like the elevator, then the platform moves Mario along with it every frame to keep him on it. Now normally, this platform displacement would keep Mario in the same relative spot on the platform. But here, because Mario was so close to the edge, and because these edges fluctuate a bit due to them only having unit precision, the platform displacement puts Mario off the edge. Like, now he's on a white square that isn't floor or ceiling. Now when a quarter step moves Mario off the edge, the game knows to put him into an airborne action. But this does not happen if the platform displacement moves him off the edge, because I guess they never expected that, since it's supposed to keep you in your same relative position on the platform. And so, Mario just stays in the action that he was already in, which is the grounded diving action. So like the other down warp, Mario's now in a grounded action, but in the air. And now Mario does his quarter steps. His first quarter step lands on a unit square that's only ceiling, meaning he moved into an invisible wall. So the quarter step returns that it got cancelled instead of that it went airborne. And like I mentioned earlier, any sliding movement that doesn't become airborne aligns Mario with the ground. And since Mario's not actually above the elevator at the moment, aligning him with the ground gives him a huge down warp, all the way to the floor down below. So it's similar to the previous down warp because we found a way to be in a ground action in the air and then slid into an invisible wall. But instead of using a turnaround to walk in midair, we used the displacement from the moving elevator. Then the ski lift in Cool Cool Mountain has some invisible walls, which makes sense because it tilts based on where Mario stands on it. Well, I guess most people just stand still when they ride the ski lift because they're already worried about falling off of it. But if you decide to jump, you could bonk on one of these invisible walls and fall down. The controllable platform in Hazy Maze Cave has some invisible walls, since it tilts both when Mario stands on it and when it bumps into a wall. Seesaws also tilt based on how Mario stands on them, so they can have invisible walls too, so you might bonk on them if you go near the seesaw's edge. The long wooden seesaw in Bob on Battlefield has some invisible walls, though they're just little tiny ones on the corners near Chain Chomp, so you'd have to be really unlucky to ever accidentally hit one of these ones. The big seesaws can also have invisible walls when they tilt at the right angle, and this one was hard to hit because you have to tilt it and then get into the right position really fast, so I kinda doubt anyone's ever hit this one by accident. And the squiggly seesaw in Bowser in the Sky has a lot of invisible walls from even the slightest tilt, and this one's very bad for speedrunners because as you're jumping across the seesaw, you can bonk and fall down to your death.
I was a bit confused of that, so I got a visible wall!
What? What? What was that? I've never seen that in my life.
Oh my god. Oh my god, he said it. What the fuck? Fix your shitty game. I'm doing 70. I'm sorry.
The loose floor panel in Big Boo's Haunt can have an invisible wall, which you could bonk on and fall all the way down into the water. Floating wooden boards can have invisible walls because they tilt based on Mario's position, but these invisible walls only occur on the sides of the platform that are away from Mario. That's because the platform updates its tilt instantly, and it's only the far sides of the platform that are walls that lean slightly forwards, meaning they let ceiling leak through. So you can't really hit these invisible walls because they stay away from you. It's like the platform is playing monkey in the middle with you and moving the invisible wall to wherever you aren't. When you fight Bowser for the second time, the stage itself rotates when Bowser jumps onto it. So as the platform is wobbling back and forth, it creates invisible walls. You're probably not going to hit these ones though, because if the stage is wobbling, you're most likely trying extra hard to stay on the stage and not going near the edges. Falling blocks rotate as they fall down, so you could end up hitting one of their invisible walls as you're traveling across the blocks. The coffins in Big Boo's Haunt rotate, so they have invisible walls. Specifically, they have invisible walls on the first frame that they start rising upwards, but no invisible walls on the downwards movement. Womps in Womp's Fortress can have invisible walls because they rotate when they attack, and these ones can happen both when the Womps fall down and rise up. Even King Womp has some invisible walls. It's almost like a defense mechanism. Like, a porcupine has quills for protection, whereas King Womp has invisible walls, which kind of are like really long, thin quills if you think about it.
What is that bonk? Hello? What the fuck is that?
The falling plank in Womp's Fortress has some invisible walls, but mainly just on one side of it as it falls down. Now this one was hard to hit, but I did find a way to do it. So first I go onto the plank, hit it once with a breakdance to get it wobbling, and then knock it down with a wall kick, which positions me perfectly to hit the invisible wall. iRock has some invisible walls, but only on the initial movement when he gets into position, not any time after that. And if you're really fast, you can hit these invisible walls. I don't know why you'd want to, but you can. Even Dory has invisible walls on the sides of his tail. But don't think of it as Dory attacking us. It's more like a sea creature who got their tail stuck in plastic and now can't get it off. So you could bonk on this invisible wall, but you could also be trying to swim onto Dory's tail and then suddenly you get downwarped to under Dory. Because remember, ceiling hitboxes downwarp Mario when he's in water. So yeah, that's the 7th cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call ceiling juts out due to misaligned vertices. And now the whole Punnett square is filled out, so let's take a look at it. Basically, the top row is misaligned edge vertex, the bottom row is misaligned vertices, the left column is floor gap, and the right column is ceiling juts out. So these 4 causes are just all 4 combinations. And now we just have one more cause to do, which is the 8th cause, aka the final boss of the causes. This one's a weird and complicated one, but don't worry, we're gonna build up to it like we always do. So, imagine we have 4 floors arranged like this. I'm gonna label them A, B, C, D, so that it's easier to talk about them. And let's place Mario in the middle, so he's airborne and about to fall down. Now when Mario's in the air, the game calculates which floor is directly below him. This is because as he's falling, the game checks to see if he landed yet by comparing Mario's height to the height of the floor below him. If Mario's about to move lower than the floor, then that means he landed, and so then the game puts him directly on top of the floor in the landing action. But now let's go back to when Mario was still in the air. As I explained, the game needs to know which floor is directly below him. But how does it calculate this? Your intuition might say, start at Mario and draw an arrow straight down, and whatever floor the arrow hits first is the floor directly under Mario. If we do that, we get floor C. But that's just what our intuition says. What does the game actually do? Well, to show what happens, we're gonna use a table. So what the game does is go through the floors one by one in order from highest to lowest, which in this case would be A, B, C, D. For each one, it checks two things: whether Mario's within the bounds of the floor laterally, and whether he's above the floor. So for floor A, Mario's within the bounds, but not above it. For floor B, Mario's not within the bounds because he's too far to the right, but he is above it. For floor C, Mario's within the bounds and above it. Now, as soon as the game finds a floor that meets both criteria, it returns that floor as the one directly under Mario. It doesn't bother checking the rest of the floors, because those ones should be further down than the floor Mario's gonna land on, and so those further down floors shouldn't affect his trajectory. You know, because he's gonna land before he goes down that far. So anyway, that's the process that the game does to find the floor directly under Mario, which found floor C. And our intuition also said floor C. So in this case, the game logic matches our intuition. However, there are some obscure cases where the game logic does not match our intuition. For example, let's say we have two floors arranged like this. Let's call them A and B, and let's say Mario's here. Same question, which floor is directly below Mario? Well, first let's do our intuition. If we draw an arrow straight down from Mario, then we hit floor A first, and so floor A should be the one directly below him. But what does the game logic do? Well, once again, let's get out the table. So the game goes through the floors from highest to lowest and returns the first one for which Mario is both within the bounds and above. Now both floor A and floor B satisfy both criteria, so really it all comes down to which floor the game checks first. So if floor A is checked first, then it's the one under Mario, but if floor A were considered lower than floor B, then floor B would be checked first and it'd be the one under Mario. As I've mentioned, the game checks the floors from highest to lowest, but that's a little ambiguous here because some of floor A is above floor B and some of floor A is below floor B, so it's not exactly clear which floor is higher up and gets to be checked first. But don't worry, the programmers figured out a very simple technique to order floors. One might even say a little too simple, because the way they programmed it is, all floors are sorted by the height of their first vertex. Let me explain. As you know, every floor triangle has three vertices: the first vertex, the second vertex, and the third vertex. But for our discussion here, we're only concerned with the first vertex. And to be clear, when I say first vertex, I literally just mean the vertex that the programmers listed first of the three vertices in the code. So a floor triangle's first vertex could be its highest vertex, its lowest vertex, or a vertex in the middle. Basically, you can't really make any assumptions about which vertex is the first one, as it's essentially random. So using the first vertex as the basis for floor heights was kind of a weird move on the developer's part. Now let's go back to the first floor layout, and let's say the floor's first vertices are arranged like this. But let me make a little change. Instead of having all the pink circles be labeled V1, I'll instead label them by the floor's name, just to make it easier to follow. Okay, so the game goes through the floors from highest to lowest, specifically from highest first vertex to lowest first vertex. So here, first that'd be floor A's first vertex, then floor B's first vertex, then floor C's first vertex, and then floor D's first vertex. So the game would order the floors as A, B, C, D. But that's just for this arrangement of first vertices. They could instead be arranged like this, like this, like this. But even now, the order would still go A, B, C, D. So for these floors, it doesn't really matter how the first vertices are arranged, because the heights of their first vertices would always still be in the same order. But if we have a floor layout like this, then it actually does matter how the first vertices are arranged. They could be like this, like this, like this, or like this. If the first vertices are arranged like this, then floor A has the higher first vertex, floor A is considered higher up in the order, floor A gets checked first and passes the check, floor A is considered the floor directly below Mario, and so if Mario falls, he lands on floor A. On the other hand, if the first vertices are arranged like this, then floor B has the higher first vertex, floor B is considered higher up in the order, floor B gets checked first and passes the check, floor B is considered the floor directly below Mario, and so if Mario falls, he lands on floor B. In other words, he passes straight through floor A. Because remember, he falls until he lands on the floor directly below him and ignores any floors considered lower than that one. So this is a phenomenon called floor overshadowing. To summarize it, it's when our intuition says that floor A should be above floor B, but instead, the game considers floor A to be below floor B due to the heights of their first vertices. And the result of this is that Mario can't land on the portion of floor A that's directly above floor B. To illustrate this, I'll replace that portion with a dashed line, meaning that that portion of floor A is overshadowed by floor B. But it's only that one portion, so Mario can land on the left part of floor A, because even though floor B still gets checked first, it fails the check since Mario's not within the bounds, he's too far left. And then floor A passes the check, so it's considered the floor under Mario. And then similarly, Mario can land on the right part of floor A, because once again, floor B is checked first, fails, floor A is checked next, and succeeds. But when Mario goes in the middle, floor B is checked first, and this time succeeds. So floor A is never even considered, and so Mario can pass straight through floor A to land on floor B. And the setup doesn't have to look exactly like this, with the bigger floor above the smaller floor. Instead, it could look like this, with the smaller floor above the bigger floor. Here, the bigger floor's first vertex is above the smaller floor's first vertex, so the smaller floor gets completely overshadowed, like you can't land on any part of it. And the setup could even look like this, where the smaller floor juts out of the bigger floor. Here, both triangles' first vertices are at the same height, but one of them still has to be sorted higher up in the order, which in this case would just be whichever triangle is stored first in the code. So even though the two triangles' first vertices are at the same height, it can still turn out that the bigger floor's first vertex is considered above the smaller floor's first vertex. So once again, the smaller floor gets completely overshadowed and you can't touch any part of it. So let's look at some examples. In Lethal Lava Land, we have this little black hexagon structure that shoots fire. And let me remove the fire to make it easier to see. So this black hexagon structure juts out of the platform below it, whose triangles look like this. And I'm making them orange, which will signify that they're the ones doing the overshadowing. Now, their first vertices are all here, so no surprises there, their first vertex heights are just at the height of the platform. But now let's look at the 6 sides of the black hexagon structure to see where its floor's first vertices are. On the first side, the triangles look like this, and I'm making these ones blue, which will signify that they're the ones being overshadowed, or at least they might be. So these triangles have their first vertices on the bottom right corner. So this is the exact scenario we just talked about, where we have a floor jutting out of another floor and their first vertex heights are tied. And in this case, it just so happens that this blue first vertex is considered lower than the orange first vertex. So these blue triangles get completely overshadowed, meaning Mario can't touch them at all. But that's just for this side. Let's look at the other sides too. On the second side, the triangles look like this, have their first vertices on the bottom right corner, and so they also get overshadowed. On the third side, the triangles look like this, have their first vertices on the bottom right corner, and so they get overshadowed. On the fourth side, the triangles look like this, have their first vertices on the bottom right corner, and so they also get overshadowed. On the fifth side, the triangles look like this, have their first vertices on the bottom right corner, and so they also get overshadowed. And then we have the sixth side. Now for the other 5 sides, the triangles were subdivided from top left to bottom right. But for this last side, the triangles are instead subdivided from top right to bottom left. So that gives us this triangle on the right, whose first vertex is on the bottom right, and so it gets overshadowed. And then we have this triangle on the left, whose first vertex is on the top right. So of all the triangles on the side of this black hexagon structure, this is the only triangle that doesn't get completely overshadowed. So as you're playing around near this black hexagon structure, you'll notice that you can just walk straight through it, because 11 of the 12 floors on its side get overshadowed, meaning they effectively have no collision. But if you go onto that one blue triangle that isn't overshadowed, then you actually can walk on it. And of course, the top of the structure isn't overshadowed either. Then in Bowser in the Sky, we have this gray spike jutting out of the yellow disc, so let's look at this one. The yellow disc has its triangles like this, whose first vertices are all here, so they're just at the height of the disc. Now let's look at the spike's triangles. On this first side, the floor triangle has its first vertex at the top, so this one does not get overshadowed. Then on the second side, the floor triangle also has its first vertex at the top, so this one also doesn't get overshadowed. Then on the third side, the floor triangle still has its first vertex at the top, so this one also doesn't get overshadowed. And then on the fourth side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom left. Now, even though it's at the same height as the yellow disc's first vertex, it's considered lower, so that means this one side of the spike gets completely overshadowed. And so if you're playing around near here, you can actually just walk straight inside the spike by passing through that blue floor. And hey look, I turned Mario into a traffic cone. But note that if you go too near any of the other sides of the spike, you'll clip onto those floors and get ejected from the spike. Then in Snowman's Land, there's this freezing water that has some chunks of snow in it. And we're going to be focusing on this chunk of snow. So the chunk of snow is on top of this orange floor whose first vertex is here. You know, just at the height of the floor in the water. Now let's look at the sides of the chunk of snow. On this first side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. This ties the height of the orange first vertex, but this blue one is considered lower, so this triangle gets overshadowed. Then on the second side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right, so this one also gets overshadowed. Then on the third side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right, so this one also gets overshadowed. And then on the fourth side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right, so this one also gets overshadowed. So all four of its sides get overshadowed, meaning you can't touch that chunk of snow at all. So for the other chunks of snow, you can go onto them just fine. But not for that one chunk, it's completely intangible, and so you'll end up going right through it. Then in the Volcano and Lethal Lava Land, we have this star platform. So the star platform juts out of these floors below it, whose first vertices are here, so just at the height of that floor. Now let's look at the floors on the star platform. So on the front side, we have this ramp, whose first vertices are on the bottom left. This ties the height of the orange first vertices, but these blue ones are considered lower, so these triangles get overshadowed. Then we have these floors, whose first vertices are on the bottom left, and so these floors get overshadowed. Then on the right side, we have these floors, whose first vertices are on the bottom, so they get overshadowed. Then on the back side, we have these floors, whose first vertices are on the bottom right, and so they get overshadowed. And then on the left side, we have these floors, whose first vertices are on the top right, meaning they don't get overshadowed. So of all the floors on this star platform, the only floors that don't get overshadowed are the left side and the top. So if you're playing around near this star platform, you'll notice that you go right through the ramp, and through the front side, and through the right side, and through the back side. All you can stand on is the left side of the platform and the top of the platform. Then in Bowser in the Dark World, we have several of these crystals on this green path. So let's start with this crystal. And let me just point out, these crystals look like they have 6 sides graphically, but in terms of their collision, they actually only have 4 sides. So I just wanted to clarify that so you don't get confused when I show the triangles. So on this first side, the floor triangle has its first vertex at the top. On the second side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. On the third side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom left. And on the fourth side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. Now, this crystal is located on top of this orange floor, whose first vertex is here. So let's look at it from the side and show the crystal's first vertices again. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than all the blue vertices, meaning that all 4 floors on the crystal get overshadowed, so you can't land on top of this crystal. Then next, let's look at this crystal. On the first side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. On the second side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom left. On the third side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right, and on the fourth side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the top. Now, you can see that the crystal is located on top of this floor, whose first vertex is here. So let's look at it from the side and show the crystal's first vertices again. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than some of the blue vertices, but not the one on top. So that means there's just one floor on top of the crystal that doesn't get overshadowed. And finally, let's look at this crystal. On the first side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. On the second side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom left. On the third side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the bottom right. And on the fourth side, the floor triangle has its first vertex on the top. Now, you can see that this crystal is located on top of this floor, whose first vertex is here. So let's look at it from the side and show the crystal's first vertices again. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than some of the blue vertices, but not the one on top. So that means there's just one floor on top of the crystal that doesn't get overshadowed. And so if you're playing around near here, you can actually just jump straight into these 3 crystals. For the first one, all 4 of the floors on top of it are intangible, though it's still pretty precise to get into because the wall hitboxes on the sides will push you out. For the second crystal, you can jump into it as long as you avoid the one floor on top that's still tangible. And then same thing on the third crystal. So if you want to impress your friends, challenge them to jump into a crystal, and then after they fail, you do it. And during their attempt, maybe don't tell them which crystals it's actually possible on. So anyway, those crystals are an example of this setup where we have a smaller floor above a bigger floor, and so the whole smaller floor gets overshadowed. Then in Bowser in the Fire Sea, we have this elevator in the mesh cage. And I'll hide the mesh cage to make it easier to see. So this elevator has a floor on the top, on the bottom there's a ceiling, and on the 4 sides there are also ceilings because the sides are tilted. So nothing out of the ordinary so far, it just seems like a normal platform. But now watch this. If we look inside the elevator, we can see a texture on the north side. That's not supposed to be there. But not only is there an extra texture there are also extra floor triangles there. So if we show all the floor triangles on this elevator, we have these 2 blue floor triangles on the top and these 2 orange floor triangles on the north side. But we're only concerned with these 2 specific triangles. So here are their first vertices. Even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, creating a triangle-shaped hole in it. Now for the most part, you can't actually reach the hole because the mesh wall blocks you from getting close enough. But at the top of the elevator ride, where there is no more wall, you can become airborne for a split second by going over the hole. But note that even at the top, you can't fall all the way through the hole because the wall pushes you out. And then in Tall Tall Mountain, we have this area near Ukiki. And for some visuals, like this one, I'm using the orthographic camera mode for both the left screen and the right screen. But anyway, here we have this orange floor at the bottom of the water and this blue floor on the side of the slope. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Now here are the triangle's first vertices. So you can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that right at the section where the 2 floors overlap, the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, creating a little hole on the slope. So if you're ever playing around here, a cool thing you can do is jump right through the slope by going through that little hole. It's like a little secret area in here, just for those who know about it. But if you move to the side, then you'll clip out and enter the water. So those holes were an example of this setup, where we have one floor above another floor, and so a portion of the upper floor gets overshadowed. So now you understand floor overshadowing. But you might be wondering, what does this have to do with invisible walls? Well, let's say floor A is actually part of a platform with walls on the sides and a ceiling underneath. Now we're gonna focus on the ceiling's upper hitbox, so let's let it extend upwards. As you can see, most of it stops at the floor hitbox as intended, but a part of it leaks through. And that's because the overshadowed part of floor A doesn't cover ceiling hitboxes. Consequently, the ceiling hitbox escapes through that portion and becomes an invisible wall. And this invisible wall isn't just a few ceiling units scattered along a seam, this is like a whole section of ceiling leaking through. So basically, if you have 2 floors with the lower one overshadowing the upper one, and you have a ceiling between the 2 floors, then the ceiling's hitbox will leak out through the overshadowed part of the upper floor. And the setup could even look like this, where the 2 floors are adjacent, so they overlap by the tiniest bit and let out just a little bit of ceiling. So let's look at some examples. In Rainbow Ride, we have the chimney in the big house. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. We have this orange floor on top of the chimney and this blue floor on top of the roof. And here are their first vertices. Now even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex. So the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, creating a little square-shaped hole in the roof right above the chimney. And then we have the ceiling on the underside of the roof, which is right between the 2 floors. So the ceiling's upper hitbox leaks out through that hole in the roof and becomes a square-shaped invisible wall. So it's kinda funny. The chimney was meant to only be in the house, but because of floor overshadowing, it's like we get a phantom chimney above the house that goes all the way up. And you can slide into this invisible wall, meaning we can do the animation shenanigans from earlier. But once you start sliding into it, you're basically stuck, because there's nothing you can do to get out of it. Our sliding movement just gets continuously cancelled by the invisible wall, so Mario stays in place. And you can't even exit out on the pause menu, because the game only lets you exit out in certain stationary actions, which doesn't include sliding. So it truly is a soft lock. Then in Bob on Battlefield, we have this right arrow sign. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. So the sign's collision is like a little box, which in theory should have 4 walls on the sides and a floor on top. But what does it actually have? Well, the front side is a floor, the right side is a ceiling, the back side is a ceiling, the left side is a wall, and the top is a floor. So only the left side and top are correct, while the front side, right side, and back side all failed to be walls. Now this sign is located on top of this orange floor, and here are the floor triangle's first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that the two floors on the sign get completely overshadowed. And without the floors there, the ceiling hitboxes extend upwards unimpeded. So if you ever tried to travel above this sign, you'll see that you bonk. But you can also just walk straight into the sign by going through the front side, because that side is an overshadowed floor. So it's kind of fun to play around with. But remember, the sign still has one wall hitbox that can push you out, so don't play around near the left side. Then still in Bob on Battlefield, we have this fence on the mountain. Now here's what the fence's collision looks like. So you can see that its cross-section has a rectangle part on the bottom and a triangle part on the top. But importantly, the triangle part is a ceiling instead of a wall. So just keep that in mind as we go through the visual. Anyway, we have this orange floor next to the fence and this blue floor on top of the fence. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. The orange vertex is just a tiny bit higher than the blue vertex. So the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, but only a little bit on the edge between them, because these triangles are adjacent instead of one directly above the other. You know, like we talked about. But before I show the invisible walls for that side, we also have to look at the other side of the fence. Because on this side, we have this orange floor next to the fence and this blue floor on top of the fence. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. The orange vertex is just a tiny bit higher than the blue vertex. So the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, but just a little bit on the edge between them, because these triangles are also adjacent. So now, let's look at the front of the fence and show the ceiling from earlier. At these two corners of the ceiling triangle, the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, so the ceiling leaks out in just 2 unit columns. So this is yet another invisible wall on the mountain, though it is only 2 units, so not the worst thing in the world. Then we're back to inside the Jolly Roger base ship. So we have these orange floors on the wood and these blue floors on the platform. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Zooming out a little, here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertices are higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that the blue floor gets overshadowed just on its edge because the orange floors and blue floors are adjacent. So now, let's look at the wall on the side of the platform. And one of the triangles on this wall is actually a ceiling. Now we're gonna do our old process. So we have 2 edge vertices on this wall, and now let's zoom in on them. This edge vertex causes a floor overlap, which means that it's a point where the orange floor overshadows the blue floor and lets that one ceiling triangle leak through. And then same thing happening on the other edge vertex. So along this seam, we have ceiling columns leaking out through little holes on the blue floor, because those parts of the blue floor are being overshadowed by the orange floor. So I know we already had 4 invisible walls inside the ship, but now we have a 5th one. And I promise that's the last one that's in here. Then in the Tall Mountain slide, we have the 4th arch. You thought there were only 3 arches? Well, there's actually a 4th one later in the slide, so let's see what's going on with this one. We have this orange floor on top of the wood and this blue floor on top of the arch. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So the orange floor overshadows the blue floor, and so on top of the arch there's a rectangular hole, which covers the whole arch except for the 2 sides. And then for the ceiling on the underside of the arch, it leaks its hitbox out through that hole. And so if you're going down the slide, you can't jump over the 4th arch either. And that means all 4 arches in the slide have some invisible wall on them. Though note that you can go on the 2 sides of the arch because the floor isn't being overshadowed there. Then in Snowman's Land, we're back to this wooden part near the top of the snowman. So we have this orange floor on the snow and this blue floor on the wood. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that right at the tip of the blue floor, there's a little triangular hole from the floor getting overshadowed. And then on the bottom of the wood, there's a ceiling. So right at that little hole, the ceiling hitbox leaks out. Now earlier, I said you shouldn't cut the corner here because there's an invisible wall there. But even on the corner itself, there's an invisible wall. So definitely not one of the better corners in the game. Then in Tick-Tock Clock, we have this section around the cage. So we have this orange floor on the bottom of the cage and this blue floor on the walkway. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. Now even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that right at the tip of the blue floor, there's a little triangular hole from the floor getting overshadowed. And then on the bottom of the walkway, there's a ceiling. So right at that little hole, the ceiling hitbox leaks out. So it's very similar to the previous one we saw in Snowman's Land. But at least in this corner, there's only one invisible wall instead of two. So I guess it's only the second worst corner in the game.
What the fuck? What did I wall kick on? I got robbed.
What the fuck just happened?
Then in Cavern of the Metal Cap, we have this platform at the end. Now we're gonna focus on one of the crystals, so why don't you take a guess at which crystal we're gonna focus on? You picked one? Okay, well you're wrong, because the answer was this little baby crystal in the corner. So we have this blue floor on top of the crystal, and then along the edge we have this orange floor. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. Now even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex. And so what that means is that on top of the crystal, there's a little sliver of a hole from the floor being overshadowed. And then for the ceiling on the bottom of the crystal, it leaks its hitbox out through that hole. So the other crystal's a-okay, but for this little baby crystal, you might not want to travel above it. And here I slide into the crystal while in the pushing animation, so you can do the animation shenanigans here too. Then in Bowser in the Sky, we have this steep ramp. So we have this orange floor on the side of the ramp. It should have been a wall, but it's a floor because this upper vertex actually juts into the ramp a bit. And then we have these blue floors on top of the ramp. So let's look at it from the side and let's look at it from above. Here are the triangle's first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that on the top of the ramp, there's a little sliver of a hole from the floor being overshadowed. And then we also have a ceiling on the side of the ramp, which also should have been a wall, but it's a ceiling due to that same vertex that juts into the ramp. So the result is that the ceiling hitbox leaks through that sliver of a hole. So like normal, you can bonk on this invisible wall, but this invisible wall is interesting because it's next to a steep ramp that you can't stand on. You just fall off of it. So just like we did in Snowman's Land, we can wedge Mario between the ramp and the invisible wall, and he just kind of gets stuck there in the falling animation. But you can get out of it. And you can also slide into the invisible wall on the side of the ramp, which means we can do the animation shenanigans from earlier. So not only is Mario running in place, but he's also sideways on the side of the ramp, which doesn't even look like somewhere you can be.
Oh my god. What are you doing, Mario? What the fuck is going on?
And then we have several objects that have floor overshadowing. For example, the spinners in Tick-Tock Clock. Zooming in a bit, we have this orange floor on the side of the spinner and this blue floor on top of the spinner. Here are their first vertices. Now even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex. So the blue floor gets overshadowed on its edge. And so for the ceiling on the side of the spinner, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. But let me make a little change. See, the objects we're going to examine will also have invisible walls from the previous causes too. So to help you distinguish these new invisible walls stemming from floor overshadowing, I'll make these ones green. In other words, if it's an invisible wall from floor overshadowing on an object, then it'll be green. So, in this case, let's watch the spinner do some movement. On this side of the spinner, we can see both some green and some red, meaning both kinds of invisible wall. But on the other side of the spinner, it's just red. But whether the invisible wall is green or red, it's still a ceiling hitbox that you can bonk on. Then in Shifting Sands Land, we have the Tox boxes. So we have this orange floor on the inside of the box and this blue floor on the top of the box. Looking at it from the side, here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex. So what that means is that some of the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks some of its hitbox out through the blue floor. So basically, as these Tox boxes are rotating around on their pathing, some rotations cause invisible walls above them from floor overshadowing. Then in Bowser in the Dark World, we have the axle for these revolving elevators. Zooming in a bit, we have this orange floor on the bottom of the axle and this blue floor on the top of the axle. The blue first vertex is here at the center of the axle, and the orange first vertex is in the exact same spot. Now, even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. And so, as the axle is rotating around, you'll see long durations of green invisible wall and short bursts of red invisible wall. So I think it's fair to say, SM64 Collision wasn't really meant for a structure this weirdly shaped at this many different angles.
Oh! What was that? There's an invis wall there? I have never seen anyone hit that in my life. What the hell was that?
And then we have something similar going on with the elevator axles in Bowser in the Sky. But there's a critical difference. Here's where the axle is this time. You see, due to a bug in the code, the axle's collision doesn't stay at the pivot point where you see it graphically. Instead, the axle revolves around the pivot point alongside one of the elevator platforms. So let's pause it here, and now let's do some analysis. So we have this orange floor on the bottom of the axle and this blue floor on the top of the axle. The blue first vertex is here at the center of the axle, and the orange first vertex is in the exact same spot. Now, even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. But wait, we're not done yet. See, the axle is so close to the elevator platform that they overshadow each other at some points. So we have this orange floor on the elevator platform and this blue floor on the axle. Here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for the ceiling on the axle, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. So that's the elevator platform overshadowing the axle. But we also have a case of the axle overshadowing the elevator platform. Specifically, we have this orange floor on the axle and this blue floor on the elevator platform. Here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for this ceiling on the underside of the elevator platform, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor, in the shape of a very narrow column. So really, we have three different kinds of floor overshadowing going on here that creates those green invisible walls. And that's in addition to the regular red kind of invisible wall. So basically, you really don't want to go near that axle. And you can't even tell which elevator platform the axle is attached to, because remember, its collision is offset from its graphics.
No! No!
No! No! How did that happen? Fuck! How did that happen?
Then in Tick-Tock Clock, we have the pendulums. So we have this orange floor on the yellow part and this blue floor on the stick. Here are their first vertices. Looking at it from the side, you can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And then on the underside of the stick, we have the ceiling here, which leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. But we're not done yet, because we also have something going on just the yellow part of the pendulum. So we have this orange floor on the side, which should have been a wall, and this blue floor on the top. Here are their first vertices. Now, even though they're at the same height, the orange vertex is considered higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. So as the pendulum swings around, you can see that it has a ton of invisible walls, both green ones and red ones. Look at it, it's like every single frame has some sort of invisible wall going on. So I definitely don't recommend jumping above one of these pendulums. That's just asking for trouble. Then in Jolly Roger Bay, we have the skull box. Currently, the skull box is on top of this orange floor, and we have this blue floor on the side of the skull box. Here are their first vertices. Looking at it from the side, you can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And then on the underside of the skull box, we have a ceiling there that leaks through the overshadowed blue floor. But that's just what's going on at this moment in the Skullbox's cycle, because a bit later in the cycle, something else happens. So now the Skullbox is on top of this orange floor, and we have this blue floor on the top of the Skullbox. Here they're first vertices. Looking at it from the side, you can see that the orange vertex is just slightly higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed. And then on the right side of the Skullbox, we have a ceiling there that leaks through the overshadowed blue floor. So now, let's watch the Skullbox do a complete cycle. You can see that it doesn't have any invisible walls as it travels left, but then when it turns around, it has some red invisible walls followed by the 2 green invisible walls that we just discussed. So if you think about it, the Skullbox was meant to get in your way by hurting you when you touch it, and so these invisible walls are basically just helping it accomplish its mission, because now it can get in your way even when you just travel above it. And last example, we have the floating ship in Jolly Roger Bay. So on the front of the ship, we have this orange floor, and we have this blue floor on the railing. Here they're first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is a bit higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed on its edge. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out a bit through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. But that's not all, because we also have something going on the back of the ship. Here, we have this orange floor on the side of the railing and this blue floor on the top of the railing. Here they're first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is higher than the blue vertex, so the blue floor gets overshadowed on its edge. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out a bit through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. So now, let's watch the ship do a full cycle. You can see that in addition to the 2 green invisible walls that we just discussed, there are also a ton of red invisible walls, both from the ceiling jutting out more than the floor and from floor gaps that let ceiling leak through. So it's like all the causes wanted to get in on this one. And if you think about it, this ship has invisible walls on its inside when it's sunken, and now when it's floating. So it's like the trifecta of invisible walls. But here, that means whenever you jump onto the ship, you may bonk and fall down into the water.
I'm just doing this, I don't care, whatever.
Oh my god! Holy fuck, I just can't, dude. I just can't get a break. I can't.
Not again. Dude, why do I keep getting stuck there?
Oh my god!
Did I do it correctly?
What? What was that?
Now there's one more topic we need to talk about, which is Mario getting squished. You see, in order for Mario to get squished, there has to be a floor and a ceiling. And then there are 2 requirements. First, the distance between the floor and the ceiling has to be less than or equal to 150 units. That's why you only get squished when the floor and the ceiling are pretty close together. And second, at least one of the surfaces has to belong to an object. So the floor could be an object, the ceiling could be an object, or they could both be objects. So you can get squished here because the ceiling is a womp, you can get squished here because the floor is a grindle, but you couldn't get squished in here because the floor and ceiling are both static geometry, no objects. And note that even if a ceiling would cause a squish, you can't just move into it. Like, it's still a ceiling hitbox that cancels your movement and prevents you from moving into it. So instead, you basically need the ceiling to move into you, and then you'll get squished. Now when Mario's squished, he goes through the squish logic on each frame, which I've simplified into 3 main steps. First, if the space between the floor and the ceiling is less than 10.1 units, then Mario takes 3 damage. So Mario has to be pretty squished in order to take damage. And note that he won't take more damage until he unsquishes a bit, that way it doesn't repeatedly damage him every frame. Second, the game tries to give Mario a squish push, we'll get more into that in a bit. And third, Mario loses his speed and drops to the height of the floor below him. Now this third step can cause a big downwarp if you're not already on the floor. Like, you don't have to be between the floor and the ceiling to get squished. You just have to be somewhere in the ceiling hitbox, so anywhere above the ceiling qualifies. So if you're in the air and then the squishing conditions get met below you, you'll downwarp to the floor. For example, watch what happens when a grindle stomps down on Mario while he's in the air. Remember, ceilings don't push you down unless you're in water. So here, Mario passes straight into the ceiling hitbox until the ceiling goes close enough to the floor for a squish to happen, which downwarps Mario. So if ceiling hitboxes can squish Mario, what about invisible walls? Well, think about the invisible walls we've seen that are made of ceiling hitboxes. There could be a floor gap that lets ceiling hitbox leak through, the ceiling could jut out and let ceiling hitbox leak through, and the floor could get overshadowed and let some ceiling hitbox leak through. The first two cases would only cause a squish if there happened to also be a floor right below the ceiling, in which case the invisible wall could downwarp Mario. For example, these coffins have a floor below them, so you can get a downwarp if one of their invisible walls appears into you. Womps have a floor below them, so you can get a downwarp if one of their invisible walls appears into you. King Womp has a floor below him, so you can get a downwarp if one of his invisible walls appears into you. This elevator in the volcano starts near the floor, so you can get a downwarp if one of its invisible walls appears into you. And the rolling log is above some floors, so you can get a downwarp if one of its invisible walls appears into you. But now consider the third case, an invisible wall from floor overshadowing. It basically comes with its own floor right below the ceiling, so that means it's highly susceptible to causing squishes. And remember, these ones, and only these ones, are colored green. So if an invisible wall is green, meaning it belongs to an object and stems from floor overshadowing, then it's very likely to cause squishing if it appears into you, which can downwarp Mario. So let's look at some examples. The spinners in TikTok Clock can cause a downwarp if you get squished on one of their invisible walls. The falling blocks in Bowser in the Fire Sea can cause a downwarp if you get squished on one of their invisible walls. Now I didn't show these green invisible walls earlier, so let me do that now. Let's pause it on this frame, zoom in a little, and hide the invisible wall for the moment. So we have this orange floor on the lower block, and we have this blue floor on the upper block. Here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is a bit higher than the blue vertex due to the way the falling block is rotated. So the blue floor gets overshadowed a bit. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. And since that green invisible wall appears into Mario, he gets squished and downwarps to the floor below him. And the same thing can happen with these falling blocks in Lethal Lava Land. Playing it again, let's pause it on this frame, zoom in a little, and hide the invisible wall for the moment. So we have this orange floor on the lower block, and we have this blue floor on the upper block. Here are their first vertices. You can see that the orange vertex is a bit higher than the blue vertex due to the way the falling block has rotated, so the blue floor gets overshadowed a bit. And so for the ceiling between the floors, it leaks out through the overshadowed part of the blue floor. And since that green invisible wall appears into Mario, he gets squished and downwarps to the floor below him.
You said like a couple days ago that you were... What the fuck?
Yeah, it is, yeah. What? What happened there? What?
The Tox boxes in Shifting Sands Land can cause a downwarp if you get squished on one of their invisible walls.
No. What? You gotta be kidding me.
The Axel and Bowser in the Dark World can cause a downwarp if you get squished on one of its invisible walls. The Axels and Bowser in the Sky can cause a downwarp if you get squished on one of their invisible walls. And that little column of invisible wall can downwarp you right through the elevator platform. You can even get downwarped all the way to the death barrier. I should mention, if you get squished enough to take damage, then you stay squished for another half second even after you're already out of the geometry that caused you to squish in the first place. So during that half second, if the floor moves out from under you, you'll downwarp to way down below, because you're still in the squished action and they're getting your height set to the height of the floor below you every frame, which was step 3. So that's why squishing can downwarp you to below the geometry that caused you to squish.
Dude, what the fuck?
I think I know what you mean, Jinsu.
Oh my god.
It's fun, right?
It's pretty good. Pretty fun.
I've hit this fucking invisible wall like... How many times?
Is my... What the fuck is happening? Is my cartridge fucking... Do I have solar flares?
No, 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 no! Are you no? Oh my gosh. I just can't believe what I'm seeing, dude! What's the problem? Oh my god! It's a disaster, man! What the hell?
pendulums in Tick-Tock Clock can cause a down warp if you get squished on one of their invisible walls, and I actually down warped all the way to the death barrier because the pendulum moved out from under me.
Oh my god. What? I just... What? I just down warped like 100 feet! What do you mean?
The skull box in Jolly Roger Bay can cause a down warp if you get squished on one of its invisible walls.
I'm gonna go for this. What?
And the ship in Jolly Roger Bay can cause a down warp if you get squished on one of its invisible walls. And as you can see, if the ship moves out from under Mario, then he spends that half second down warped to the bottom of the lake. But once the half second is over, he upwarps back to the top of the water, because remember, entering water upwarps you to the water's surface.
And invisible. Yep.
Yep!
They ask you how you are, you just have to say.
So to like one day have a better... Bro!
What?
Now let's go back and talk about the squish push. Basically, when you're squished, the game tries to be nice and help you get unsquished. More specifically, if the floor is at a steep angle, or the ceiling is at a steep angle, and Mario's squished inside, then the game gives Mario a little push in the direction with more room, which is an attempt to get him unsquished. And this little push is what we call a squish push. Let's take a closer look. Now the ceiling hitbox is still in play here, which will cancel any movement that tries to go into it. So there are basically 3 cases of what can happen with a squish push. Case 1, the squish push puts Mario into the ceiling hitbox and so it gets cancelled and nothing happens. Case 2, if Mario's pretty close to the bound of the squishing range, then the squish push can put him outside of the squishing range and he'll get unsquished. Here's what that looks like in the game. You can see that Mario gets just a little push to the side. But there's a third case, and I'll shrink the floor a bit to make this work. If the squish push puts Mario into the air, then it triggers a special piece of code. This code puts Mario into the standing action, which is kind of weird because he's in the air. But more importantly, this standing action instantly cancels the squishing action, meaning no more squish logic will occur. And so we call it a squish cancel. So let's walk through the whole process, this time using an invisible wall. So let's say Mario's in the air and there's an object below him that shoots an invisible wall right into him. Since the surfaces belong to an object and there's less than 150 units between the floor and the ceiling, Mario enters the squished action. So now we follow the steps on the left. So first, Mario may or may not receive damage depending on how close together the floor and the ceiling are. Let's say they're not close enough, so no damage given. Second, Mario gets a squish push, which goes to the left this time because that's the direction with more room between the floor and the ceiling. The squish push moves Mario a little to the side, out of the invisible wall and into the air. I mean, he was already in the air, but what's important is that the squish push sees that he ends up in the air. That triggers the special code for a squish cancel, meaning that it cancels the squish and puts Mario into the standing action. And that's it. We never even get to the third step where Mario loses his speed and drops to the floor. So that's the cool thing about a squish cancel. It lets you keep your speed and keep your height in the air, leaving you in the standing action. And then on the next frame, Mario enters the freefall action because, you know, he's in the air. So basically, a squish cancel lets you transition from any air action into standing and then freefall. So let's look at some examples. Here I do a squish cancel on a spinner, so I go from long jumping to free fall and then I ground pound. Like, you can't normally ground pound when you're long jumping, but the squish cancel transitions Mario from long jumping to free fall and then he is able to ground pound. Here I squish cancel on the elevator axle in Bowser in the Dark World, and you can see that squish cancels can give you damage if the space between the floor and the ceiling is too small. Because remember, the damage is given out on step 1, but the squish push and squish cancel happen on step 2. Here I squish cancel on the elevator axle and Bowser in the Sky. Now since squish cancels can give out damage, we can do something pretty silly. Watch here as I squish cancel 3 times in a row, so I lose all my health in a split second. So it just seems like Mario dies out of nowhere, but it's because he got squished 3 times in quick succession. And squish canceling on the elevator axle is even done in the 1 key task, which is the fastest way to beat the game. See, Mario backwards long jumps on the elevator to build up speed, then uses a squish cancel to redirect that speed, and then does a huge jump to the top of the level, because the faster you're moving, the higher you jump. We can squish cancel on the pendulums in Tick-Tock Clock, and remember what I said, squish canceling puts you into the standing action even though you're in the air. So you can actually jump on that 1 frame when you're standing in the air, which is pretty cool. But that's not the only height advantage that squish canceling gives. See, squish canceling on the pendulums is actually used in the A button challenge. Here we have the pendulum repeatedly squish cancel Mario, which lets him do a chain of ground pounds all the way up to the ledge above. You get it? Like each ground pound raises Mario by a little bit, but then before he falls, the pendulum squish cancels him, putting him back into free fall, which allows for another ground pound, and so on. And so you can see that each time a green invisible wall hits Mario, his ground pound gets interrupted by the squish cancel, and so he's able to ground pound again. And so we call this technique a squish cancel ground pound chain. And squish canceling on the pendulums is also used in the tasks for collecting the stars in Tick-Tock Clock. So first, Mario backwards long jumps on the invisible wall on the stairs to build up speed, then he launches towards the pendulum for a squish cancel, and then Mario's speed is redirected and he's able to wall kick up to the star. And this squish cancel was actually done on a red invisible wall, not a green one. Let's pause it, zoom in, and show the surface triangles. So on this frame, Mario's above this floor with this ceiling right above it. So those are the surfaces that he squishes between. And the ceiling leaks out not because of floor overshadowing, but just because of these walls above the ceiling that lean slightly forwards. Then here I squish cancel on the skull box in Jolly Roger Bay, which lets me jump in midair. Here I squish cancel on the ship in Jolly Roger Bay, and I squish cancel many times in quick succession. The result is that Mario falls really slowly, because each squish push actually resets his vertical speed back to 0, so he never builds up very much downward speed. And last use case, here I use squish cancels to jump over and over, which lets me climb really high up. You know, because each squish cancel gives me 1 more jump to work with, and then I use that jump to enter another squish cancel higher up, and so on. Here it is from another angle. It's pretty crazy to watch. Mario can just jump up with no actual geometry there, purely using the powers of squish canceling. And here it is again, but this time without the invisible walls shown. It's like Mario's climbing an invisible ladder, just jumping up in place over and over. How does he do it? Well, now you know. So yeah, that's the 8th cause of invisible walls, which we're gonna call floor overshadowing with ceiling in between. And so there you have it. That's all 8 causes of invisible walls, with visualizations of every instance in the game. So as you've come to learn, invisible walls aren't actually this scary elusive thing. It's just 8 simple causes following the natural logic of the game. And now that it's all explained, there'll be no more mystery or confusion. There's a bright future ahead of us, full of knowledge and understanding, and I'll be there to explain it all. Welcome to the new era. Now the video's actually not over yet. I have one more surprise for you that you're not going to want to miss, which is the finale of this video. But before we get to that, I want to say some words. So first, a big thanks to all the members of my channel who supported me while I worked on this video. See, this video took 10 months to make, which if you think about it, is more than 2% of my life. But I felt that explaining this topic was really important because it covers so many weird interactions in the game. And now that this video's done, I should be able to make many more videos and at a faster pace. So if you want to see more videos about deep dives into Super Mario 64 mechanics, make sure to subscribe. Now, making videos about Super Mario 64 is my passion, so my dream goal would be to make this my full-time job. So with that as my goal, I've decided to rework how memberships work on my channel. See, to become a member of my channel, you click on the join button below the video. That lets you become a member, meaning you pay me a little money each month. You'll also get access to custom emotes for my channel. But to really make it worth your while, at the end of each video, I'm gonna have what I call a member event. But to clarify, member events will only happen on regular videos, not YouTube Shorts because they're too pressed for time, and not music videos because I don't want to distract from their artistic merit. But on regular videos, like this one, we're gonna have a member event. The way it'll work is that all the member names will participate in the event. So you, the member in real life, can just sit back and relax because your name will do all the work for you. And the specifics of what your names will be doing will be different in each video. Now, I've created different membership tiers so that you can pay a little more to get more perks. So first, we have tier 1, which is $5. In this one, your name will appear along with your profile picture, and your name will just be black text. Then second, we have tier 2, which is $10. In this one, you can choose a color for your name, so just leave a comment saying what color you want. Then third, we have tier 3, which is $15. In this one, you can choose a gradient for your name. So you can comment something like blue on the left, green on the right, or red, white, and blue. You could even say rainbow. Then fourth, we have tier 4, which is $20. In this one, you can have a moving gradient for your name. Looks pretty cool, doesn't it? And fifth, we have tier 5, which is $25. In this one, you get all the previous perks, but also I'll make sure to specifically call out your name during the event, like saying how your name is doing. So let's do a member event right now. Instead of all your names being boxes, let's say each of your names was an amp, and they're all coming after me. First one to hit me gets first, second one to hit me gets second, and so on. So now it's a full-on competition between the names. Will you win? Will you lose? Only way to find out is to become a member. And to clarify, all members will have an equal chance of winning regardless of which tier they're in. So the higher tiers are really just aesthetic, not for buying an advantage in the event. So as you can see, I'm trying to escape from the amps, but there's not really anywhere to hide on this box. I know, I'll go to the right, but tricked them, I'm going left. Ugh, get out of here, CadBrad, I'm trying to be sneaky here. Well, there's only 3 of them left, so surely I can evade them now. Nope, Vija got me. And now just 2 remain. Who's gonna get second to last? And it's Lady Houndstooth, which means that last place goes to 2 water guns, if they can even hit me. Oh, there we go. And that's it. So congratulations to our first place finisher, Weej. There's no prize or anything, it's all just for fun. Well, and bragging rights. So if you want to get in on the next member event and support me financially, please consider joining my channel as a member. It really does help. And now for the surprise. See, I wanted to do something special to celebrate our new knowledge of invisible walls. So I present to you a new version of Super Mario 64's ending sequence, this time featuring the game's invisible walls. Think of it as a tribute to just how glitchy this game is. After all, it's not that we love this game despite its glitches, we love the whole thing, glitches and all. So here's to all of our glitchy experiences, both ones in the past that we didn't understand, and the many more to come that'll hopefully make sense now. So thanks for watching this video and enjoy the finale.